Shall we open our workshop with a salute to the flag? Greg has it there. Everybody should be unmuted. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America,
and to
the republic which it stands,
one
nation,
under
God,
indivisible,
liberty,
justice
for all.
Good morning, everyone, to our workshop, and thank you. Let me just see if I can put a workshop. The workshop ideas on the Board of Estimate and Taxation were never my idea. I took that from the Board of Ed, and I think it's worked well for us in the past. Today's goal, a little bit of background, a little bit about all the conversations that got us to the Budget Committee, budget before us, got us through the virus discussions that are ongoing, and to share ideas, because as you know, Monday is decision day for the BET. The Budget Committee had 9 meetings, as you know. They went through and wrestled and balanced and made recommendations to us, which showed us a certain mill rate and certain expenditures and took certain considerations into it. There was a lot of discussion during the Budget Committee where I think the Budget Committee was kind of split on their decision on things. This year is before we get to the virus, this year has some other new twists in it. The twists that go on the pay to throw bags, or is it the tipping fee bag, or what is it? And there's still that conversation out there that's a little bit challenging. So today, so post Budget Committee meeting, we decided to postpone our meetings because the governor had put out a directive that we were able to do it, even though we are still within our charter deadline. We have till May 5th to submit. The RTM did extend their time frame. So as we consider this, we have to consider the RTM may have a completely modifying economic time when they make their decision, or they may not. The economic times may stay the way they are, and I'll use the words a little bit bumpy. They may recover, and the RTM may have a different timeline. But they're scheduled right now for June 8th, and then we are working with our schedule for mill rate. There's been talk about changing our mill rate date from the 15th, maybe to right after the RTM with a special meeting or something like that, in order to give the Office of the Tax Collector just a little bit more time to get the bills out and be organized, especially with the deferral program. So after that, we've had a lot of conversation between BET leadership. As you know, we've had the transition team in place for the technical side, which always leads to a few conversations. It was last week we were summoned, BET leadership was summoned by Ben to come talk to this. So in order to keep it fair, it was Ms. Moriarty and I, and then obviously Karen and Mr. Weisbrod was joined in. And we had a meeting last week with Ben, and Ben's opening position with us was, what are you going to do? Of course, we don't have the answers to that. We have thoughts, but we don't have answers. So it was decided at that time for Ben to go have a chat with all of the appointing authorities and come back to us with some ideas. Well, we got those ideas last night at 5 o'clock. We'll be able to share those. Up until that, we had an agreement amongst ourselves, or at least a directive, that we were going to try to do things Wednesday morning. So all of us had a whole day to review any material that came in. That was a little late yesterday. It did come out yesterday by both caucuses, but it was a little late. We were trying to wait for Ben to have some input, and quite frankly, I have reviewed some of his input. I haven't really gotten to his capital in detail yet. We have a chart maybe today we can share to compare ours versus there, but in general, that's where we've gotten. I think in summary, yesterday after that, conversations in that working group that was working with Ben, we found sort of a how close we are or how close we aren't between the two ideas. I'll speak for the Democratic Caucus. They've submitted their mill rate calculation with adjustments to various items, pretty much having an understanding of what the items are. As you saw yesterday, The Republican caucus has put out everything from a memo. And by the way, you can thank Mr. Weisbrod for that memo. He encouraged that. So I took him up on that. And you're going to see a detailed plan of what we have and a mill rate calculation where it brings us to. So I think today is just a balancing of ideas. I think there's 12 people here with a lot of passion and care for the town. And I think it's just, in my words, if I were asked, I think the town has to make some judgment decisions on the economic times, what we think is going to be part of fiscal 21, what we think is going to be part of fiscal 22, 23, et cetera. So with that said, I'm open for suggestion. If you'd like, I can put a mill rate calculation document up there and show you the differences, between what I think the two groups that we are sort of the thinking, but I'm open for suggestions.
Mike, this is Leslie Moriarty. And I don't know if we have to identify ourselves every time we speak, but I'd suggest we start with where the budget committee ended. Now that was pre-virus, but just to show the starting point, I believe that the grand list number needs to be updated from that level, but just so that we're all clear what the initial starting point is.
Let me see if I can help. Can everybody see this document can anybody see this document?
It's up.
Okay, so, and I'm gonna lean on Roland a little bit. So if I'm not mistaken, this column shows the budget for the current year, budget committee recommendations, this caucus, Republican caucus recommendation, Democratic caucus recommendation, the difference, and then so everybody knows, in this column, this is a first look, and this comes from neither caucus. This is just one of the things that I asked Roland to do is just take his normal assumptions and sort of just roll them forward to take a look at it. So I can leave this document up. I can do whatever you would like to do.
Mike, can I ask a question?
Please.
On my screen, I can't get that to scroll, but is that the same as what's on page 10 of the Republican submission? It looks to be from the top half of the page, which is all I can see.
Yes, this column J, Jeff, is exactly verbatim what I sent in. Column
Okay.
L comes from Miss Moriarty.
Okay.
And
Ms. Moriarty, am I accurate?
Yes, if I can ask Roland to make one change for clarity, because he's got the spreadsheet. The line 29, which shows the various revenue reductions, the Republican proposal aggregated their numbers. That line didn't change the other three lines. The Democrats made the modification in line 31. It should be $5,450,000 as the reduction, but maybe you could make that change on your spreadsheet to put $5,450,000 on line 29 as a negative, and then restate line 31 back to the budgeted level. So detail for presentation.
Roland does not have this. Would you like me to? You want to switch documents, Roland? Or you want me to just get you this document and you share it?
Does he have it in Excel?
I don't have that one. I don't have the Democratic caucus recommendation.
Okay. Deborah will email that to you right away. I'll stop sharing screen, and then you could share screen, Roland, and then you can. It's in Excel, so you can do what you need to do. Is that okay?
Okay.
Mike, for Jenny, I have on the screen sharing that you did a minute ago, there's a legend across the top that says that the security content access has been disabled. Maybe that's something that Jenny could release, and then I'd be able to scroll when you put it back up on the screen again.
No, Jeff, it's what's happening is you're working off of, you're looking at a document on my screen. When Roland puts it up, any changes that you would like or scrolling, he'll be able to put those in there.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry. This is a Zoom world. I wish we all had this in paper in front of us, but this was just generated last night at 6 o'clock. So
thank you. I'm muting you.
When the chart comes back up, I think let's focus on where the budget committee started, just so we're all, we are in our attendees. We have 13 of them. Understand what our starting point was. And then then I don't know whether you want to jump to the approaches each caucus took in developing their proposal.
Sure, we could do that, certainly. We could do that. That's again, I think that's what we're here for today. So I'm trying to find Roland, give Roland a second.
And while he's doing that, I mean, I think our goal today is to talk about our assumptions, let each of us think about alternate ways of thinking about the number to try to come to some understanding of how we can work together to get to a bottom line. I think we all see different issues. I think we all know that this isn't personal. This is all we're looking at and using our best judgment to help the town through this and help the residents through this. But we're a going concern. I think we have responsibility on services, and the differences probably are at the margin, but let's understand each position. I think that would be a great outcome.
Any luck, Roland?
Yeah, I just got it.
Oh, good.
I didn't fix the suggestion of Leslie. I figured you would do it when you take it.
Yeah, once Roland has it, he can edit as we ask him to. I need a 60-inch monitor.
Okay, I have it.
Okay, just share screen. Bottom center green button. Okay, for all of our panelists, just remember, I don't have you. We're all just not raising hands at the moment. I don't want to have to go to that, so it's just sort of open. So just our normal etiquette. Okay, so Roland, I think the first question, what did you want to do, Roland, there?
We adjusted the revenue here.
I thought we should start with column H. And maybe Roland can walk us through the budget committee final outcome and what that ended up with as far as impact on residents. And I think the grand list number, that was a question that we had. That grand list number, I believe, was, we have a final number after the BAA, which is higher than the 33.4 billion. So
the number that Lauren certified to the state at the end of January was the following number. If somebody wants to take it, it's in the minutes of, it's in the packet for our March 16th meeting in the report from the assessor, and it's 33,438,000.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if somebody, $497,489.
So that's the number that's over in column L. Should be, granted, it's not in the budget committee number. We didn't have it then, but it should be copied into the Republican recommended budget, if you agree. Okay.
Okay.
So everybody understands, by changing that grand list number in the budget committee's number, it's going to make a change there, because you'll see the change, but just so we're all aware of that, that's all.
You mean that column
Roland,
8?
so Roland,
Right.
what does the mill rate end up being when that change is made? The
Looking
mill rate increase?
It's right on your screen, Leslie.
column H.
1.35%.
Thank you, Roland.
So the key takeaways, I don't know if Roland or Leslie wanted to talk about it, but so the budget committee actions resulted in an increased mill rate of 1.35%. We did have a number of 2-2 votes, so there wasn't unanimous agreement that that necessarily reflects the right level of spending, and that usually gets addressed again at the full BET. But this number, part of the reason it's 1.35%, though it's really at the margin, I don't think there were significant operating changes. Most departments came in at the budget guidelines. This includes the policy change for changing the way we're paying for waste disposal. It's moving 3.5 million out of the town budget, which accounts for about another 1 percentage point change. It might have been closer to 2.5% if that 3.5 million were in there. I don't have the exact number, but that would have been sort of the business as usual budget that we had approved. And since that time, certainly we've had the impacts of coronavirus and the change in the economic forecast, which both then parties looked through the proposals to come up with what changes would be maybe to the town's revenue and how you address for that. This included capital spending. Roland, if you want to go back up a little bit, capital proposals at that time had come in at $73 million. Again, at the budget committee, we had a lot of 2-2 votes on things that necessarily wouldn't have been where we ended up if it were business as usual. And a capital tax levy of the $56.8 million.
And also that capital number that Leslie mentioned, we failed to deduct the $250,000 that we had already, I think, approved in the budget committee for the MISA, fix at GHS that we were instructed under their ED 09 to reduce their, whatever it is, plumbing and heating budget or something too. That's just something that we missed in the end there.
Right. And we had approved that in an interim appropriation. So yes, so it should have come out of the next year's budget. The project was already funded.
Leslie Moriarty, if I may, I want to just continue on with your thoughts. Now that we've just found that 250,000 and the budget's balanced and we're all done and we can go play golf. Here's the point. This is the budget committee recommendation, okay? And I heard we already talked about tipping fees. So I think one of the challenges that all of us have is the tipping fee, whatever it's currently labeled, and the estimated revenue in the budget. That is the taxpayers in the town are going to pay that, whether they pay it in a mill rate or they pay it in a fee. I'm of the opinion that I think the RTM will approve that fee, and I think it will allow us to stay with this view. But I look for members' input. Some people think, well, we're passing that. No, the residents or the property owners and users. They're going to pay that estimated revenue, whether they pay it in our mill rate or they're going to pay it through a fee for hauling. So I think everybody needs to understand that, and then allow you to then put the real value on Roland's on the budget committee column, because we should be consistent on how we're thinking about that with what I'll call the two proposals.
If I could ask a question, just to lay the groundwork a little bit. Roland, you may want to just scroll to the bottom. I mean, but in the pre-corona period, the budget committee, through its wisdom, voted for whatever it is, 1.35 or 1.46% increase in the mill rate. Wasn't voted on by the full BET. Everyone recognizes that the world has changed as a result of the coronavirus. And we all understand that, whether you be whatever your persuasion. The question becomes, and we're all talking about cuts. And as we go through this, my question is going to be, we're not cutting a number. This is not about cutting a number on a spreadsheet. It's about cutting services that are provided to the people of the town of Greenwich. We all recognize we have to do that. But I think we need to go through this exercise understanding what's the least damaging way to achieve that, and to what degree do we need to do that in order to acknowledge the new reality, if you will, of the coronavirus. We're not cutting a number, we're cutting specific services that the people are getting in the town. So that's just my preamble.
So Mike, do you want to, should we each of us go through how we were thinking about revised changes to the budget at the kind of at the macro level before we get to the specifics? How do you want to start this conversation?
Whatever you like.
I can ask a question, Mike. I'm sorry, it's Laura.
Please.
I think we've all recognized that our revenues are going to take a hit for next year. I think that's a common understanding. So maybe it'd be helpful to walk through what our revenue assumptions are for next year before we get to the specifics.
Okay. Roland, can you put up the page with the revenue?
Page 5 from the Republican submission.
Just a little interruption. Jenny, would you please call Karen?
I'm here.
I'm texting, but she's up. I'm texting with her now. Yep.
I'm here.
Right?
He's here.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. Sorry.
You can bring her up to panelist if she's not already on her phone.
I'm a panelist already. I'm co-host.
Okay, good. Let's get back to the revenue question.
Roland, you have to stop sharing screen and go to your other document. I think it's part of the document that you sent out.
Right, these are the revenue reductions that we made right here.
No, I think what Ms. Erickson's asking for is the breakdown of what revenues we anticipate being reduced.
That's what's on the screen right now.
You know what? You have to stop share this document. Even though your computer is showing the screen, you have to actually select that to share.
Yes. That is why with Zoom, you want to put everything in one opening package and then click page to page to page within that one document. There you go. So if I think Mr. Raymer had the question here, or Ms. Erickson had the question. So let me see if I can explain it. Roland, just cut me off. Interest income, this was actually talked about at the very end of Budget Committee. And by the way, I want to say, I think Ms. Cruiser had sent in a motion early on to amend. I have not really seen it, but I think it's similar. So the idea is interest on our money as we collect taxes, being in the bank, earning interest, a reduction of $2 million. That would leave you 5 in the budget. Conveyance tax, it's about a 10% reduction. This in itself is why I sent you out the 2012 stuff, because this is a number that was cut by 50% at that time. But these are just our best judgment. Building permits, you can see a reduction of 750 to that. We're already seeing building permits in March were 50% reduced in the application. This stuff is, by the way, the biggest question that we had in our caucus was this membership. And I think if Roland should answer what that is.
That membership is the beach memberships.
Got it. Okay. And then that's the operating. And then in the state grants, LoSiP, cost sharing, pilot, telephone, and the unrestricted grants that we receive. So you take your grants from 14.9 estimated, and you bring them down to 9. Could someone make a positive discussion that some of this should come down more? I would think they could. Could somebody say that they're not going to come down this much? I think they could say that too. I think this is just a guesstimate.
And so Yeah, this is a guess, and I think when we talk about the impact on recreation, it's really hard to know what's going to happen. We had been talking amongst ourselves a little bit, individuals, on what this revenue number should be. I think there's general agreement that all but the recreation lines are the assumptions we should go with. We don't really know what will change with conveyance and building permits, but it makes sense to be a little bit more conservative. Interest rates are using current numbers, and Miriam and Andy did a lot of work to come up with those numbers really look like. And I think it's appropriate to zero out the state grants. The state's financials are going to be looking pretty bleak, and they may have to revisit what money goes to which municipalities. The recreation numbers, I think the difference between our proposals is about 200,000. In those numbers, we used 5.7 million of lost revenue for these particular items. You used 5.9 million. So we just need to come up with what that number needs to be. Mike, I don't know yet, though, whether you then took your lower assumptions for revenue for these items and then carried that into the operating expenses, because at least some of these programs, maybe not user fees, do have temporary salaries associated with it.
You know, that is hang on, I lost my screen here for just a second. That is a very good question. So let me, again, if this document, by the way, if our thoughts that we're looking at are 3 days old, I can tell you all of us in 3 days. So last night, part of a conversation about in town about opening up marinas and the boating. Well, as you know, if we're not going to open up the town marinas, I don't suspect we're going to get any of the revenue in for slips. Then the question will be, well, what are we doing with the staff that runs marinas? And I don't have those answers. I don't think we're here to create those answers. But we all know that in general, Parks and Rec is worth $4.5 million of revenue. Now, the golf course is a standalone. So if they open up golf, there might be very little impact. Golfers will go, that money will stay in that revolving fund and go accordingly. But I don't have the answers to that, Leslie. I think, again, I think you're going to, we've discussed this. I think the approach is to get a grip on the growth of the operating budget until we can really see how this pans out going forward. And we can adjust these revenues. If we're $200,000 apart, to me, I think we're thinking along the same lines. I have individually polled 11 BET members. I haven't gotten to one yet. And I said, what's your estimate on revenues? And I will tell you that the numbers I heard were from 6 to 12. So, so that it's just a conservative number. It could be, we could go higher with a loss of revenues. And would that make us want to reduce the operating expenses more? Maybe. But I can't speak for that.
Okay. Where do we want to go from here?
Okay, that's revenues. Roland, could you go to the capital tax levy? I have a question for you. Not the capital tax levy, the mill rate calculation. Actually, the comparison document that's in Excel.
It's page 10.
No. Well, I want to use the document we had before because that's in Excel. Roland's converted all of the documents to Adobe. So if I want to do some calculating here. And can you scroll up a little bit? So I have sort of Roland, what happens if we increase the question here is about the capital tax levy and the borrowings and what that does to the budget. And I guess my question is, and I've been given the answer and it just hasn't gone through yet. What happens if you increase the borrowings, okay? In either scenario, just if you were to increase the borrowings, what does that do to the mill rate? If you don't change, if you leave the capital tax levy as presented, but you increase the borrowings this year by $2 million, just
it won't do anything. We'll simply be borrowing for more of the projects, unless you change the tax levy itself, it won't change the mill rate.
Okay, so I don't care which proposal you pick. Doesn't matter to me.
Mike, maybe I should walk through on a very high level how we went about coming up with our proposal, just to kick off this conversation.
Okay, then you want to go to your documents then?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
So Roland, are you able to pull up what we sent you?
Yes.
So in general, we started with the same starting point that you did. We know we're losing revenue. We said 5.7, you had 5.9, in the same ballpark. And did not, felt that we should make some accommodation as much as we can within the operating budget to cover that loss of revenue, and then work through what other implications that would have. In going through the operating budget, and this was partly also based on the conversation, Mike, that we had with the first selectman and the town administrator as to how they can look at their budget. And what they indicated is they felt that they could go down by the 1.3 million, which was close to their 20 budget, roll back the increases this year. Now, we all know union contracts currently call for wage increases, so that's not necessarily an easy thing to do. And then we looked at the Board of Education. And Roland, can you pull up, not this document, the other one that I shared, which had the mill rate calculation, and then the second page with the some of our rationale on it. Then we looked at the Board of Ed. The Board of Ed is always a challenge. And when we looked at what an adjustment could be made to the Board of Ed operating budget, we worked through the numbers to include what they've been communicating to us about challenges they're having with their special education out of district tuition. And if you go to the next page, Roland, this page just shows the same numbers that we've seen on the other chart. This helps explain where we came up. What you'll see in our budget proposal is that we reduced the Board of Ed recommended budget by $700,000. Doesn't get them down to their fiscal 20 budget. But when you look at and see this section, I'm clicking on my screen, it doesn't really help, but the analysis, if you include the special education adjustment and how we looked at this. So the Board of Ed budget currently, right in the current budget, is $163.4 million. They came in with an interim appropriation last month before the virus, calculated at 1.14 million adjustment to their operating expenses that they would need to cover that particular line item. So if that had been approved, it would have raised their budget. I'm ignoring the other 80,000 in that request right now, but just for special education, it would have raised their budget to 165 million. They also indicated in that document that they're 1.5 million short in their proposed budget to cover special education. So their proposed budget, where it currently stands per the budget committee, is at $165.7 million. If you add that 1.5 million of special education adjustment, you get to 167.9. So by reducing the recommended budget to 165, all right, that number on the chart's wrong. It should be 160. Oh no, yes, to 165.7. We're really taking a 1.3% reduction in their operating budget. And looking at the percent reduction for the town departments, they're at 1.08%. So a $700,000 cut is really like a $2.2 million cut to them, because they're not covering a known expense that they have that hadn't yet been covered in their proposed budget. And so the 700,000 we think cuts into the meat. There will need to be adjustments in how and what the Board of Education delivers and the decisions they make. So that's one of the key differences in your proposal and ours, is that we're reducing operating expenses by 200,000 from the recommended budget, but that's excluding the known shortfall of the 1.5 million for sped out of district tuition. Then we had notified, and both of our proposals include this, that there's a delay in the state's increase of premiums for healthcare, which will benefit the town by 900,000. So we're both able to take that reduction in the proposed budget in healthcare and hits fixed charges. So when you add those things together, we get to a 2.9 reduction in expenses, direct expenses. Doesn't fully cover the $5.7 million loss in revenue. So the other ways that we address that change is, first of all, the town is going forward with a new lease for the Verizon cell tower and the golf course, and currently it's structured to go into the golf fund, and we believe that should be pulled into the general fund. That's kind of a major windfall for the golf fund, and I think it's appropriate to bring it back to help us in this situation, and probably going forward it should be in the general fund as well. So that helps the revenue, offsets the revenue reduction by about $250,000. Then the other change we made is we looked also to the capital projects. And Roland, you can go back to that first chart of this document. Capital projects, we talked about a reduction in the range of $20 million to go from the 73 that's in the approved budget by the budget committee down to about 53 million. We're still working up on our specific list of what those are, and I think there's a discussion to be had. The first selectman presented us with his recommendations, the Republicans have theirs, and we individually each have where we would go on that. So that's about 20 million that differs from your proposal, but it allows us to reduce the capital tax levy. Now, this is, again, a key point in differences between our proposals. We're reducing the capital tax levy. In the recommended budget was going up $3 million. To have it only go up 1 million, so that falls right to the bottom line. It's 2 million we're not taxing for. But we do think it's important that it be maintained at a significant level, because we know that these projects are just being deferred. We know they have to be paid for in the future. We know there are other large projects coming down the pike. The town does intend to continue to operate and increase and improve our facilities and our school buildings. So by taking that too low, we're going to put in jeopardy a little bit that future capital spending. The next year, fiscal 22 capital budget, and we don't scrub that during our review of the current year's budget, but it was even higher than the 73 million that we came through this year. So there's some pretty big projects that people would like to address. Typically, we address projects. The timing is always the question, but we're talking about pushing things out pretty far. And I worry about lowering that capital tax levy too much. And then the other place we went is using fund balance. We did say our fund balance is the rainy day fund. I think it's raining right now. We think that there's some money that can be 2 million that can be taken out of capital non-recurring fund balance and $1 million from the unrestricted fund balance, but the total aggregate number was 3 million, about in line with where you went also. But that was our proposal and our thinking. 5.4 million really of a revenue loss that had to be filled. We got to 2.9 million from operating budget cuts, and then the rest really coming from the fund balance. It got down to a mill rate, if you scroll down the chart, Roland, of a 0.72% increase over the current year, which is lower than the proposed budget that the budget committee had recommended.
So just a quick question. So that's an unbalanced budget. So you're not balanced. Your revenues and expenditures are not even.
We have, it is balanced. Roland, can you scroll up just a little bit more where we can see the expense level? So we have expenses of 454 455 million of expenses. We're raising more in property taxes than you are because we have a higher mill rate there. But where are we not balanced? What's not working here for you?
Well, expenditures and revenues have to balance out. I mean, we always have a slight, we could always have a slight adjustment to do that, but it's just, it seems you're coming down with the expenses, but you're leaving the tax level.
No, we came back, so we're down in expenses 2.9 million. We're down in the tax levy of 2 million. So that means that we've got close to 5 million that we're down. We have revenues of 5.45 that we're covering, and we use fund balance in the rest.
Okay. Questions, discussion? Remember, I can only see 6 of us. I can't, because with the shared screen, I don't have everybody. So just questions, anybody?
So it is David Weisbrot. Maybe Roland can give us all a little bit of tutoring on the capital tax levy. I mean, basically what Leslie is saying here is that when you make adjustments as she's just described, we're really talking about a $2.2 million reduction in the Board of Ed plus $1.3 million for the departments, which is not that far off essentially from what you're going to talk about. The one area that is, and that's a debatable point, the one area that I think there is confusion among us, at least on my part, which I think Roland can help us with, is the big difference between your proposal on the tax levy, capital tax levy, and what Leslie just depicted here. Maybe this is the wrong sequence, but I think it's just a question of fact, understanding how that all plays out.
And Roland, if you want to put back that original comparison chart, it might be easier for people to see the numbers.
By the way, I made that chart all by myself with no help from anybody. Look at Deborah laughing. This was a very helpful document.
We did the same thing. We have it too.
Okay, in this case here, we're only taxing for $51 million. So even if we add capital, we would increase borrowings dollar for dollar, and the 51 would stay unchanged. That's really how the capital tax levy works. The borrowings is a plug number between what you're going to tax for and the projects you're going to approve.
But how do you, I mean, I know the answer to this. How does the borrowings, I mean, part of the reason to reduce the capital is not so much for fiscal 21 per se, but it's to set the debt service lower in the subsequent years for the unknowns that are going to escalate far above CPI, i.e. pension, healthcare, and all of those items. So I think David's question is change the model and show the impact.
Well, you can see the impact right in here.
Okay.
So this is taxing $2.8 million more than
3.8.
3.8.
I mean, so the capital tax levy, you solve for how much do you want to tax, whether it's 51 million or 54,847. And then from there, you could have higher or lower capital, but the variable will just be the amount you borrow. And then that is the point Mike was making about the more you borrow now is just more debt you pay back in the future. So we did 2 things. One is we reduced the capital tax levy below where you are. You reduced it 2 million, we reduced it more. But we also reduced the amount of capital, which in turn reduced the amount of borrowings.
And the problem is it's, you know, for capital especially, we have to look longer term. And you look at that capital plan, and the amounts that are coming at us, because that 30 million that you've reduced, or 35 million that's being reduced from capital, is going to come back next year or the year after. It's going to come back. So, and that's, 2/3 of a whole year of capital. So we're talking about a significant impact on future capital budgets too, that we would just all need to recognize.
Well, but this is Karen. The other way of looking at it is that we're just basically pushing back capital, the capital plan 1 year. I mean, it's not necessarily saying that we're going to do all the capital next year. I mean, we're just pushing back, and whatever is being deferred or postponed this year is going to next year, and then we'll have to postpone things next year for the year after, et cetera.
Exactly. It's a long-term, it's more of a long-term change to what our capital plans are to be. That's exactly right. And it also has the impact, part of what we've been doing in that capital tax levy is, as we all know, is to build up that number so we're able to address the capital needs in town. When this originally started, the goal was get to 50 million because we thought that would be the steady state that would cover the capital needs, covering debt repayments plus the amount of cash. But the list of capital that needs to be addressed continues to grow, and so we need to go beyond that. 51 million in here is just basically covers what the BET policy is for our capital tax levy, right? It's to cover the debt repayments and a minimum of 10% of the capital requests. And so it doesn't give much room to be able to cover more than that level of capital going forward. And I just...
Yeah, but Leslie, I think we need to, and this is probably not the forum to do this, but long-term, look at the capital requests. And, let's face it, it's a very aggressive capital plan for the Board of Ed, who, privately, if not publicly, have said they're not going to be able to address all that capital within the time frame that they originally laid out. So I don't think that it's the crisis that you're saying. I think that there's got to be a more thoughtful plan going forward to address the projects that can be done. Again, we have a backlog. We haven't been able to do projects. I don't think it's the crisis that you're saying it is.
There's a small latent other effect to the low capital tax levy of the 51 million being proposed in the Republican handout. The fact that the 51 million, after you deduct the 45,700,000 for the debt repayments, leaves $1.6 million roughly, and under our policy where the cash component has to be not less than 10%, it limits fairly strongly our ability to consider any of the deleted capital items as an interim during the year. And that was something that I know that Mike had spoken about from time to time, where we can always come back to the capital items. We can always come back to the capital items during the year, but only if your capital tax levy was enough that you could entertain a further capital item and still remain within your policy. And at these numbers, you'd be restricted to about 16.8 million in total value of additional capital items during the year.
Let me. There's more questions coming up. It's fantastic. Let me just. I guess I'm going to have to do go through our presentation to make the balance. In thinking of the capital, let me just say this, and I think I'm speaking for everybody. I don't think anybody's doing this to
You there, Mike?
I'm there. I'm sorry.
Okay.
I muted myself. I think we all try to mute ourselves to stop background noise. There's a few questions that are kind of developing that there's probably answers in each one of our presentations, but I think what I think about capital right now is that during this last 5 or 6 weeks, I'll give you an example. We have a firehouse renovation going on down in Barham. and it's done by outside contractors just rolling along. And that project was continuing when the shutdowns began. It was continuing. And then what happens? One person on an electrical team calls out sick. Now the rest of that team doesn't want to go to work. So in theory, the Board of Ed has done yeoman's work. I know they're still continuing on with the high school coupler project and getting all that done. That started beforehand. They're all opened up. But even the Board of Ed has come out with a policy that they don't want the work going on in the building. So naturally, the pandemic is sort of stopping production. I'm not talking about cash. I'm talking about, it's just sort of stopping production. And for many years, we've had a conversation about how do we appropriate, what's getting done, getting caught up. You know, we have been making progress across the board with sort of closing the lag between the appropriations and getting the work done. But we've just found ourselves a new lag that we didn't create. It wasn't created from cash. So I don't know how to put the value to that. I just think that there's just, typically a lot of our summer capital initiatives might be just foregone right now. They just might be postponed, not to our liking, not to any of the appointing authorities' liking, but it just may happen. So
Hey, Mike, I just want to go back to what Karen was saying. I think our understanding of this is the same. And I just want to be clear, and that is that by reducing the capital tax levy by 5.8 million, which I think is what you're going to talk about in your proposal, we are, as a BET, and this is a question for us, foreclosing the flow of capital projects in future years. It's going to have an impact on the scale of capital projects in future years, which is, I think, what Karen was articulating. Now, that's fine if that's, in other words, it's not just a number. What happens is, if we go to a $5.8 million reduction, then there's no way we're going to be at the level of capital projects that we've had or that we were talking about in fiscal year 21 and before the coronavirus hit. Now, that may be fine, and the community may wish that, but I mean, it's not a deferral. It's effectively a permanent or quasi-permanent curtailment. That's my understanding of the way this would work out. And if that's wrong, we ought to discuss it.
I don't want to differ in your choice of words, but the only thing I think I would say to that is your proposal defers 20 million and ours is 34 million, 35 million. So I think both plans show whatever language you just wanted to use, both plans show that. Just one shows it on a greater level than the other. That's all.
But the point is that we both acknowledge, there's a lot in common between, this is remarkable. You went in one direction, we went in another, and we came out with something that's incredibly comparable. It's really quite a testament to the brain power of this BET. I really believe that. I really do. The difference is whether we go to 20 million cut or 36 million cut. That's not the argument right now. The argument is the capital tax levy. Once you reduce that by that number, by 5.8 million, I believe we're essentially planting the seed for a future year diminution of the scale of projects. We can cut, let's say the Democrats and Republicans both elected to cut 36 million in this year's project. If we both kept the capital tax levy at the same level, we could more readily restore that in future years when and if the world gets back, if we have a V-shaped recovery, God willing. And that's the difference. We're not arguing about the 25 that we have or the 36 that you have or whatever. We're talking right now about that capital tax levy. That's all.
Mike,
hold on one second. Well, I just noticed on the bottom of my screen, Laura has had her hand up and so has Andy Deuce. We weren't using hands, but we can do whatever you want to do. I'd like to go to Laura, then Andy, and then back to whoever else.
I just want to be cognizant that we've had these numbers for about 12 or 15 hours or whatever it's been, but the public has not. So I want to be sure we're being very thoughtful how we approach this conversation. And I think when we're talking about the capital tax levy, I just want to be sure everyone understands that in the budget committee budget, which is that column H, the proposed capital tax levy was an increase of $3 million, which is our normal practice. On the Republican proposed capital tax levy, it's a negative 5,847, if I'm doing the numbers right. So
Negative
that
2.8.
the proposed reduction in capital in the Republican caucus proposal was about 37 million. So the shift is from a positive $3 million to a negative 5,847. So Roland can check those numbers, but I just want to be sure, again, we have a baseline and then we take it very slow because, boy, the poor people listening, they're probably going, what the heck's going on right now? And then just to carry that through, the Democrat caucus proposal was to reduce the capital tax levy from an increase of 3 million to an increase of 1 million. So that's a $2 million benefit or a less tax that needed to be raised. So if I'm making any sense, if Roland could translate that somehow into the spreadsheet so people can see, I think that might help clarify things for the people watching. Thank you.
Andy. Mr.
Yeah,
Bruce.
look, this is just a pause. The 35.9 that we recommend for capital is driven in part by, as Mike addressed, what is actionable over the next year. And there's lots of things going on. I wish we were in a V-shaped curve, but I think we're in a U-shaped curve where we have lots of drags on getting things done. I think the 35 is just realistic. The reduction of the capital tax levy to 51 million is really in many ways conservative because we're only spending 35 capital. And obviously, if in future years we decide to grow or return to the original schedule on capital spending that we were contemplating last year, we can grow the capital tax levy not at 3, we grow it at 4, grow it at 5. We've seen demonstrated in months past, growing it at 4 or 5 million per year will allow us to accomplish everything that the schools in the town would like to do over the next 15 years. But this is basically a pause, in part because we can't actually execute on this next 12 months, most likely. I don't see anything dire here. I think I think 51 actually is fairly prudent. Thanks.
Well, respectfully, there's a couple of respects in which maybe that isn't quite true, Andy. I mean, there's a policy decision that's been made by your caucus to take out and freeze in place Julian Curtis, and I guess substitute Old Greenwich, which hasn't been cut or reduced. You've also taken, which I find somewhat remarkable, the security measures at the high school. And I worry about the possibility of there being some dreadful event at the glass corridor crowded with students, visible from the street side. And we're pulling this out for the sake of economy. I mean, those are not measures that I would have undertaken. So I think we're doing more than just a pause here, you know?
So I just want to, just so we all keep on level, there has been no policy change whatsoever. There is just a series of ideas. That's what's before you. There has been no policy change by any caucus. So I would ask that we continue that. Oh, are there any more questions on this? Because I think it would be better to go back to what the original plan, Ms. Moriarty and I think had was to.
Laura has her hand up.
I'm sorry, I didn't see that.
Oh, no, sorry. That was from before. I'll lower it. Thank you, Karen.
Mike, I just wanted to make one comment before I think we move to the having a description of your proposal. But one comment on the capital tax levy is, you know, to say that in future years would be able to increase that, can you get increase the capital tax levy $5-6 million, whatever that number was, sounds fine now, but that drops directly down to mill rate, which is going to have pressure from healthcare costs and pension costs, and we always have trouble balancing the budget. So once we go to a certain level, realistically, the expectation of increasing greater than 1 to 2% causes us, you know, more pressure on the operating budget. We just all need to recognize that.
So I'm going to ask Roland to unshare so I can share, and I'll just give everybody something to think about with capital tax levy. if you look at the documents I sent out, the history back in 2012, the BET reduced the growth and reduced the capital tax levy for a 4-year period to deal with the economic times of 2008, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Being that this adjustment to the capital tax levy is coming from my caucus, I will just say, not a new invention, a repeat of history. We recovered, and that's when the capital tax levy was in the 20 million range. So again, nothing new, nothing revelating. We returned back. And I will tell you, there was a fella on the BET back then who did not want to do that then, but the economic times caused for it. That fellow who didn't want to do that back then, but did do it, was me. So I hate to say this, but I've been there and I've done this before. This is what we had to do back then. This is what prior BET members did. Some of you who were on the Board of Ed back then, you experienced it back then. So to put things in perspective, I think we need to be fair as we say things. So I'm going to try to share screen here for a minute. Let's see here. Time out. 1 second. Just give me a half a second.
Hey, Mike, while you're doing that, I will note that when the capital tax levy started growing at 3 million a year, that was a much higher percentage increase than 3 million over 50, which is only a 6% increase. So if you continue on a 6% increase, which is that we've had in the past, we'll get to the incremental 4, 5, 6 million per year in very soon.
The other one last comment on this is, Mike referred to the actions we took in the past, and these are different times, and we're all saying we do want to tighten our belts and to make decisions to lower the impact on our residents for their property taxes. But people still care about this town. We want the investment. But just looking forward, our capital plan is so much larger than it was back 8 years ago. More of them, more expensive. So
by the way, regarding this capital plan for the schools, we may want to revisit it, given that we've had this pandemic and economic recession. Just a thought.
So let me just say, I'm going to try and run through this presentation, and I want to thank all of you for helping me make it. Every one of you. The idea was, in my mind, I think what I went to the caucus with, and the caucus came back, is something that David Weisbrod said before: the least damage in what we do. Now, that damage is, I think he's talking financial, but I think he's talking morale, operating plan, benefit or not benefiting the taxpayers, keeping the town running, and doing things that are repairable, revocable, or anything you want to do. So with that, I also had a thought in my mind at one time before we met Jenny Larkin and Craig Jones and Tom Klein. I said to myself, we may not be able to pass a budget. I didn't know what Zoom was at the time. So I had to take and start thinking about the big picture and using experience from in the past. So with that, the BET, I was on the phone and I'm with one of our members who's looking up right now. And I said, what choices do we as a BET have? We can raise taxes. We can reduce appropriation. We can use unrestricted fund balance. And we can use our bully pulpit to call for the appointing authorities, who seemingly have a lot more ability to do things than we do. We can use our bully pulpit to say, hey, you got to do something. And by the way, that's what happened in 2008, because the economic meltdown happened post approval of the budget. And that was a David Weisbrod question to me. What would have happened if we didn't delay approving our budget? So I'll take you through. I'm going to go to tab 1. And the idea was, if we couldn't approve a budget, what would happen? The departments would revert back to their 20 appropriations. So the idea here is, it's very simple. Some of our departments already were 0 and negative, so there was no reason to adjust those budgets. So this is just straight out of your 20 budget book. This is what the budget is. This is what the budget committee recommended. This is the change. This would be the revised operating budget. To my surprise, the number comes out, if you bring in the other funds, as you'll see down below, it's about a $5.8 million reduction in operations. that $5.8 million in operation reduction, if you restored things back to normal in the next fiscal cycle, that would be a $58 million reduction over 10 years because you reduced the base. Or the BET and the departments could change to close that gap and accelerate it, okay? I'm gonna hear all kinds of excuses about what else we could do, but the truth of the matter is the appointing authorities have far more ability to do things, and we can go into that, and you'll notice that in the note I sent you. Revenue reduction. We've gone through this tab at nauseous. We're apart by $200,000. I'm looking at Leslie Moriarty. When we figure that out, I'm sure we're going to probably find some agreement there. Capital deferrals. 2 reasons. Number one, we've talked about it. We've touched on all of it. Okay. We know that there's a mechanical delay in capital right now, and we know that there is a need to address future budgets by allowing ourselves to commit to less debt so we have more cash available. So let's put things in perspective. If you left the $78 million of capital in there for 5 years, divide that by 5, there's your debt service. If you cut it in half, divide your debt service by 50%. Now, one thing that we have not talked about as a BET is what happens when the federal government or the state does a stimulus package with us. My answer is I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. The next question comes on fund balance. Up until the motion came out for tax deferral, I think all of us might have been a little more willing to use fund balance. But now all of a sudden we're saying way better be a little careful because we don't know what the real impacts. Will there be a January deferral or not? So these projects are just a judgment call of what likely is not gonna, what could be deferred half a year, a whole year, whatever the case may be is. And my thought was Mr. Raymer had suggested to me that we appropriate everything and it's subject to release it and let the RTM, and then we'll put the bonding resolution and then we'll go back to the RTM and say, hey, we released these projects. That is a thought. I don't think that thought would sell. Not with the BET, but I don't think that thought would sell. So I think we all need to, we haven't gone into any detail as a BET on this, and I'm sure we will over in our thoughts in the next couple of days. But that was the idea behind this. It's probably not, most of this is not going to get started. Deferring it's not going to hurt anything. And it definitely sets us up for a better cash position going forward. Capital reductions, very simple. What do we know is in play that needs more money that we can trim back what they need for the next fiscal year? Do they need all of what it is? I don't want to go into any specifics here because we could have a debate on it. And notice I have not said anything on the merits of any operational department budget or capital project. I totally respect the departments, what they've submitted. I want to be fair. I can't think of in a time right now where we would even contemplate reducing any public service budget, but we're not doing it for that. We're doing it because we're taking our high level approach to making discretionary decisions to keep the town moving and prepare for future budgets. Okay, so we can have these conversations. I encourage all of our members to have those. And as you've heard from Roland, if these numbers change by a couple million, it likely minimal impact, but I think it's a conversation that needs to happen. The mill rate. As we go down here, okay, you'll see I'm using the next tool in the draw. I am increasing, as you are too, by the way, just to be fair. I am increasing the use of fund balance. And I'm also considering what the budget committee recommended was, and if I say this wrong, please feel free to interrupt. The budget committee said, look, we have a fiscal hole for Nathaniel Witherell for fiscal 19. We need to fill that. We want to do a separate kind of thought and use fund balance to fix that hole. I agree. I think that came out of the budget. But I'm also using another tool that we have, which is use of fund balance. Okay? So if you look at this, that's an increase. We're using 10% of fund balance. So we are using one of the things available to us. So no one could come back and say, well, you weren't fair. You did this, you did. No, we're using every opportunity we have. Roll that down and you could see it ends up with with this just changed today with the grand list change. So I'm sure this will change and fluctuate a little bit. Okay. So a budget summary. Okay. As you know, I'm going to ask questions now because the reason for a budget summary is to ask questions. Here's what we spent this year. Here's our current budget. Here's a recommended budget from the budget committee. okay? Here's what our proposal, our thoughts were. I don't even want to use the word proposal. And then let's look and let's ask some questions. Do we think pension next year is only going to go up 4 million, the contribution? Do we really think healthcare is going to go up only 5? I don't know. I don't have these answers, nor do you. But these are things that we have to consider. What do we think the impacts to OPEB are going to be? Look at these fixed charges numbers. If you look at the budget roll up town year to year, it's about $6 million in operating and $9 million in fixed charges. I have to tell you, we don't have the luxury in fixed charges to take the reductions here. And then if you anticipate where things are going next year, okay, so let's do some quick math here. If in this year we did $368 million and we're planned, and then the next year we went up to 390, okay, budget committee brings us up 13 million more. We bring it back a little bit. So if you escalate on top of this, you go to 412. But if you escalate on top of this, what the budget committee recommended, how far are you? You're going to start in February. Our budget committee, we are so lucky that we are in the middle, we're at the start of a term, so we're all together in this. But you're going to see next February, if we don't make these changes, the budget committee is going to say, okay, we have a typical $16 or $17 million roll up, but we're missing revenues. We've got things escalating greater. And all of a sudden the budget committee is going to sit there and say, we got a $30 million window to close. I can't close that $30 million window this year, nor can you, but we could certainly get our hands on the window and close it a little bit and prepare for that next year. Okay. So again, no merits. My compliments go out to all the departments and the appointing authorities. They have more. What I'm saying is we've used every tool in this proposal that the BET has. From here on in, the appointing authorities, and I think you're seeing this in motion. You're hearing hiring freezes. We're not hiring temporary help. So that's really it. And if you roll it on to what we call the big page, you can see it right here. Okay. This is funny. This is the first time I've ever seen this chart without negative numbers. It's the first time I've ever seen that. And the question I have, that I think I'll be responsible for, and I'm speaking for myself because I'm making a proposal. In these economic times, can I raise taxes in the mill rate to the public? I understand they're going to get increased costs. And let's answer the other questions. What's the state going to send our residents for taxes? What's the federal government? Pensions, tolls, all of the other, I'll use on the fringe comments that we hear about all the time. Tipping fees. The residents are going to, the inhabitants in the town, one way or another, are going to pay more. Okay? I'm going to just say that I think the BET should try to do what they can do to not have that happen as far as the mill rate.
So could I speak?
Everybody's free to speak.
So let me speak for a few moments, if I can just touch a few things. First of all, you characterized the cuts on the operating as being a movement to whichever was lower between the budget committee projected budget or the current year's budget. And the fact of the matter is actually you have several departments where you're actually at less than either one of those numbers. That's true for firefighting. It's true for police uniform patrol. It's true for highways. It's true for environmental health. It's true for the Bruce Museum. It's so for Parks and Rec. So, I mean, there are little further cuts. Jim Lash, somebody who I think we all had respect for and who contributed greatly with his time in town service, particularly on the BET. He said that one of his targets as he would do the budgeting process was to have a budget that has a level of amenity that makes this town a town that he actually wants to live in. And I think that's not a bad byword for us. We should be thoughtful about maintaining a level of amenity so that this remains an attractive place to live. I think the budget is being proposed here, which for schools particularly is a budget that's willfully less than we know they would need to survive. To be cutting $3 million and do nothing about the special education out of district tuitions for $1.5 million, nothing about the $100,000 for special education, consulting, etc. I think that's just setting a system up for failure. there's 82% or something like that are labor contracts. They contract with their teachers for a year, so they can't start the year with a program whereby, I'm sorry about that ring in the background. I don't know how to separate myself from the ring. They contract with their teachers for a year. And so they can't start the year willfully on a program in which they are on contracting for a budget that they don't have the money to spend. They have rates of compensation that are committed, by the union agreements. Just a second, let me just. I think a point needs to be made here. I did this exercise with my caucus. I apologize to my caucus. The differential between the mill rate levels that the Democrats were proposing and the mill rate levels that the Republicans proposing was about 2 points, maybe not even quite. If you take a median house in town, a median house has a value of about $2 million, a little less actually. The taxes at the mill rate that was proposed by the Budget Committee, the taxes on that house would be about $16,500. If you reduce that by 2%, the savings to the homeowner is about $350, $355. It's a savings about $166 per payment. So you want to be thoughtful about not reducing the level of amenity in the town, to go back to Jim Lash's proposal, to a level which you begin to erode the quality of what we have in this town, all for the purpose of going to the taxpayer at this distressed moment and offering him as a solution a savings of $166 per payment for the median taxpayer. A little more for the homeowner who owns a lavish house, a little less for the homeowner who owns a modest house. I mean, I think those are small savings. And so one wants to be doing a balancing back and forth between, on the one hand, when you're making cuts that are prudent at these times of distress, and when you're making cuts that are visiting on the taxpayers, a circumstance in which, as a consequence of the coronavirus, we are beginning to erode the quality of life in town. We have $63 million projected of fund balance, even after you deduct the application of $15 million of fund balance to buy down mill rate. That's a number that's in both scenarios, more or less. And add to it the $4.1 million to eradicate the accumulated negative fund balance at Nathaniel Witherell. You still have a fund balance, $43.9 million, which is right up at the top, 9.8% of the projected budget for the town, including fixed charges and capital. In our 5 to 10% range, that means that we're going into the year with a fund balance which is budging right up against the top of the range that we strive for. Lastly, please don't lose sight of the fact that as my Republican friends thoughtfully put together a budget, they had that $3 million error that resulted from the use of a wrong grand list. So there is on the table, so to speak, even for the Republican thinking on that, the possibility to be applying in solution of some of these problems, $3 million that hadn't been originally conceived of. Those are my remarks. Thank you.
Let's see. Mr. Weisbrod had his hand up. Mr. Deuce had his hand up. And if I may, before Mr. Weisbrod, I was going to ask Roland to put up that comparison document, but I'll hold off on that. I'm sorry. Mr. Weisbrod, I'm sorry for the interruption.
No, thank you very much, Mike. Thank you. I wonder if this is a technical question, whether we should have Roland take us through on the fund balance, just so that we understand, again, I think like the capital tax levy, I think we're on the same page. We understand it, but I'm not 100% sure that all 12 of us, including myself, fully understand the, both you and both parties are looking at a roughly similar cut in the fund balance or utilization of fund balance. But I think it might be worth 5 or 10 minutes of his explaining how that works so that we all get it clearly. I may be the only one, but
Whatever you'd like. Roland or Peter actually would have to do that. They have that document.
I mean, it's Pete's document, so.
Let me make Mr. Minarski a co-host so he can share a document.
Mike, I don't have the document.
Oh, okay.
It's in the package.
Oh,
It's
page 4. It's
page 14.
If you want me to share it, I can do that now.
please, please.
that would be great, Roland.
All right, to follow up to David's question or request, if you look at the document last year, the audited on a GAAP basis fund balance was slightly under 63 million. If you all recall the email I sent earlier this week about where we are at this point and where we're going to end up projecting break even. So from 62.8, I rounded off at 63 million. That's the number that's in the middle there at the bottom. The policy takes into account 3 funds. You've got the general fund on a GAAP basis with the unassigned fund balance. That's the number in the upper left, the 40.6 million. The capital non-recurring fund is the 10 million. If you recall the email, we're at 9.5 million, but we have capital project closeouts at every end of the year, which elevate that slightly. And we've got about $1 million+ we're hoping to get from FEMA for Superstorm Sandy. So that's a low estimate of 10 million. The risk fund, the 1.6 million, and please stop me if anybody's not following me, is going to be replenished at July 1st for 3 million if everything holds for the budget process. That comes up to 52,270, and then the 1920 budget, which has already been passed, is the 44 million. Your fund balance ratio is at 11.77. Now, the upper left number, the 40.621, this is, you have to understand this. How do we go from 63 to 40.6? We have to subtract out next year's use of fund balance. Now, this number is already becoming obsolete because when I did this, the numbers have been elevated slightly to come up to close to 20 million. And I'm going to follow up on that and follow up on Leslie Moriarty's comments. We don't know where we're going to end up with encumbrances because one thing that's happening now is there's a tremendous slow up in cost, everyday cost that everybody knows about. I mean, it's obvious in the Board of Education where they hesitated on the 1.2 and said, wait a minute, our costs are changing with the buses, the substitutes, et cetera. So what we do is we have to take from the unassigned 2 pieces that are assigned, the 6 million encumbrances and the 16.378. So that is basically what we have available. Now, 2 comments. We traditionally always replenish the use of fund balance. Even 3 or 4 years ago, when we gave Nathaniel Witherwall a little bit over 5 million, we were able to absorb that through surpluses in the expenditures surpluses in the revenues and surpluses in underspending. So my second comment is, if I had a preference going back to the Democratic model and Leslie's comments about using 3.3 million more on the fund balance, if I had my preference, I would take from the 10 million capital non-recurring, 3, 4, 5 million, and leave the 12 million 378 or 278 alone. Dave, did I get you through your question as far as fund balance?
Yeah, thank you very much, Pete. And if you net through it all, whether we applied 3 million or 2.7 million, say 3 million, is what Mr. Raymer said correct, that we would then be at about, what would our percentage be in terms of the fund balance ratio?
If we did what?
If we took 3 million to plug the gap that we're talking about?
I don't have it in front of me, but it would be, to his point, at the upper level. Your policy is 5 to 10%.
Yeah.
To Jeff Raymer's point, you're still at the upper level. Right now, we're in violation, bad word, but it's a good position to be, is we're in excess of our fund balance policy. We're at 11.77, the number on the right, upper right. So to Jeff Raymer's point is, if you lowered it, took more fund balance, you still be at the upper level of the fund balance range, target range.
Okay, so you'd be 9.5%-ish, that kind of thing.
A little higher, yes.
Higher.
Or higher. Okay, that's, I just, we've heard a lot of numbers about fund balance, and I didn't know if we were all on the same page. I myself wasn't completely sure, but I think you've just explained it. That was good.
It's the term that Leslie Moriarty referred to. It's never more appropriate. It's a rainy day fund. We call it a rainy day fund, and it's raining. And it's this is the one time no one will question you. When I say no one, I'm referring to the Fitches, the S&Ps, the Moody's, because all the AAAs, God forbid the less than AAAs, are in a lot worse shape. They would understand the use of fund balance to get where we are, to get through this period where revenues have just evaporated, and it's just, the state's a perfect example. Look at they have a $2 or $3 billion fund balance that's going to be wiped out next year.
So whether both the Republican and Democratic proposals here are essentially the same, and neither one of them is imprudent in terms of utilizing too much. I think we're on the same page. I'm good. Thanks, Pete.
All right, thank
Peter,
you.
This is Laura. Thank you for that explanation. That's very helpful. I just want to clarify again, keeping the attendees in mind. The assigned use of fund balance is what the Budget Committee was originally proposing to use, which was the 12,278, and then the payment for the Nathaniel Witherell from the prior year of 4/1. Is that correct?
That's correct. The two add up to the 16,378 that's in this document here that you're looking at. But it's, even though the document's a week old, it's stale already, because, and I agree, I support what both the Democrats and Republicans are trying to use, is grab more. My only recommendation is, if you're going to grab more, I would go to the 10 million capital non-recurring, and mechanically Roland can explain how. I think the Democrats have a model that shows where we put that in there. I would use the extra fund balance from capital non-recurring. This is a fund that we've traditionally tapped in cases of emergency. Superstorm Sandy, we had a little bit less, but we were able to appropriate in December, I think if it was 2012, $3 or $4 million to correct the Island Beach, the Greenwich Point, the marinas, et cetera, through the BET and the RTM approval process. That all got replenished through the insurance and FEMA reimbursements. Last year, this is a perfect example of using this fund. We were at the Board of Ed, we had the 4 floods, and we were able to appropriate millions of dollars. Again, notwithstanding the $25,000 deductibles 3 times and $100,000, we've replenished that. So in my mind, the $10 million is a lot more than we need for emergencies. And if you ever, in a worst case scenario, which I don't foresee, reduce this too much, you could always default to the general fund as far as supplemental or interim appropriations.
Thank you, Pete. One more follow-up question, if I could. So if we were to look at July 1, 2020, prospectively, so the unassigned fund balance would be about the same. The capital and non-recurring under both caucus proposals is a use of about 3 million. So let's say it's 7 million. And then the risk fund balance is already planning to be increased. Remind me, is it increased by 3 or to get it up to 3? So as of July 1st, what would the balance be of those 3 funds?
I think I'll defer to Roland and Mike. We're still at 3 million, right? Roland and Mike?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, keep in mind, the difference is that you're going to get July 1st, $3 million more in the risk fund. So you're going to go to 3.6.
Okay, thank you.
News, but keep in mind our SIRs, our self-insured retention levels, known as the deductibles, are now $3 million per incident that happens going forward. So if you had a case of 1 or 2, you would wipe this fund right out with 2 $3 million hits. But that's not going to happen July 1st.
Thank you.
Okay.
Mike, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. While we're still on this chart, if I didn't see any other hands up or anybody speaking up, Peter, you're saying right now we
Mike, you have Andy asking a question.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Deuce.
But it's not in this chart. It's going back to Mr. Rammer's comments.
Okay, so on this chart, if I'm understanding this chart right, Peter, you're anticipating closing fiscal 20 with 63 million of total general fund uncommitted cash available, correct?
63 is both assigned and unassigned. Yes, correct.
Got it. Both, all 12 members of the BET, through their ideas on budget amendments, are planning currently to use 4 million for Nathaniel Witherell and an additional 3 million general fund balance. 4 and 3 when I went to school is 7, which is more than 10% of what we have. So that would bring the balance down to 50, call it 56. And that puts us.
The 4 millions are.
No.
4 millions accounted for.
Oh, because of the budget committee. Got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you. And
can I follow up, Mike, on that?
Please.
If the increase, what it does is they're inverse. The unassigned is reduced, let's say by 3 million, and the assigned a reciprocating amount of 3 million. The 63 stays the same.
Gotcha. And then the other thing you had brought up about capital tax levy, using that, I as you know, the capital tax, I'm sorry, not the capital tax levy, the
capital non-recurring.
Capital non-recurring fund, as you know, is a fund governed by state statutes, and it's got 3 ways monies can go into it, and only 1 way they can come out. Correct. So we cannot transfer from that fund to the general fund for use in whatever we're operating and whatever. However, we could, this is new ground, we could appropriate some of the capital projects from that, which then has an impact on the other side. Is that correct?
Where's Roland? Roland, you want to comment on the mechanics and the mill rate calculation?
We would show that as an inflow in the capital tax levy. That's how we've done it. And in the past, we've also put money into the capital non-recurring as part of the capital tax levy. So we just have we'd show the inflow coming in from the capital non-recurring fund right into the capital tax levy.
And it has the effect, if we don't change the capital tax levy from one of these proposals, it lowers borrowings. Is that correct?
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Anybody else on this chart? Okay, Mr. Deuce.
To go back to Jeff Raymer's comments, I find it hard to believe that with a budget of about $500 million and keeping the mill rate unchanged, we're going to diminish or risk the quality of the town services. There's just too much flux in the budget to expect that. And the other issue I have is when you hold out a specific program that's at risk because of what we do or don't do at the BET level. I'm thinking of the special education budget for the schools. I'm reminded, and this is perhaps not quite right for this environment, but I'm reminded of an old Mad magazine cover. You know what we're going to be referring to. It's a picture of a dog with a gun pointed to his head, saying that the magazine's title says, if you don't buy this issue, we're going to kill this dog. That's ridiculous, of course, but it reminds me of how departments can hold specific programs over our heads saying that if you cut our budget, we're going to cut this appropriation. Anyway, I reject that. Sorry for a little bit of humor if it's if it's off base, but I do reject that. And I do think we have lots of latitude in our budget to still deliver quality services that our taxpayers and residents need and demand.
I just want to respond to the behavioral impact of a cut, and I can't raise my hand as a co-host. So when we tell the departments what we're expecting them to do for the full fiscal year, when we approve a budget, they start the year, and I truly believe all our department heads attempt to come in with whatever budget we allocate to them. So the Board of Education has prepared a plan for their current budget at 163, $3 million cuts, and at 166, knowing that they're already 1.5 million in the hole. And if they didn't get that money, they would start the year trying to figure out how to address that change. And they would make adjustments, whether it's staffing or other programs. You're right, they have tools that we don't have as the BET. We're not allocating where to take out money. When you take out an additional $3 million, that's more meat into their budget. So now they're 5.5 million in the hole starting the year based on the plans that they had. And while there may be some comment that, yes, if they can't make it, they'll come back to us for an interim, our expectation is that they would try and meet that budget. So what that means is on day one, they're making operational decisions on what they can and can't deliver to meet that budget given their full year estimates. And that will have an impact on all the kids in the system. It's not targeting special ed, it's all the kids. It's general education, special education, and every other program that's offered. We also have a situation where for the past month and potentially over the next 2 months, the level of academic growth for our students may be compromised. We don't know what that is, but how well this distance learning is really achieving the objectives. And so there's the open question of what catch-up needs to occur. Is that a larger summer school, whether it's remote or not? Is that additional programming in the fall to help kids recover where they should have been? And so I think, yes, I'm more sensitive to that level, partly because that board did not talk with us about the budget level we're talking about. We didn't reach out to them. We did talk to the town departments who said, we'll make it work. We didn't hear from the Board of Ed whether it can work or can't work, and maybe that's a question we should be asking. But I think it's different. It's not targeting one program, we're taking out this much money from a program, but that department is going to try to fit within whatever budget we approve. And so we just have to be very aware of that.
Thank you. Any hands up? Let me just check screen. I don't see any hands up.
Mike, I can't raise my hand, but I would also just like to comment. First of all, Jeff, I think that just to address some of your comments where you equate a $350 tax break as being non-consequential. I don't know what circles you gather in or you hear from, but I'm hearing from people who have lost jobs, who have had significant cuts to their salary, who are trying to figure out where they're going to make the next mortgage payment, how they're going to survive in the next year. These are real things that are happening to real people. So to say that $350 or however you calculate it, whether it's $350, $1,050, it's not going to make a difference. I don't believe that. And I don't think you should either. I got an email from somebody telling me they had a 25% reduction in their salary, and they're trying to raise 3 kids and one's in college. So, I think that those are real things that our people in town are experiencing. With respect to the education budget, with all due respect, there are tools, there are things that can be done. I don't think that there should be one program cut, even if their budget is reduced. I think there are savings that can happen, and I think that there are ways to do it. I think that every department in town needs to be creative. These are extraordinary times. One estimate I read today is that they don't anticipate the economy rebounding for another 10 years. We don't know the extent of this pandemic debacle on the economy, but it's not going to happen overnight, a recovery. So I would just caution you to realize that there are people that are experiencing real economic challenges, and we're trying to respond to that.
Mr. Raymer has his hand. He's spoken on this. If there's Mr. Raymer.
Bill Drake is gesturing to you.
Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Drake followed by Mr. Raymer, if that's okay.
And just following up on Ms. Moriarty's comments, I just wanted to fully understand. You quickly ran through a $3 million cut and another $3 million and then the 1.5 of special ed, and I kind of got lost on the curves of the race course there. Can you just please explain to me, maybe to the rest of us, one more time that arithmetic that you went through?
Sure. The budget that was presented to the budget committee and that the budget committee acted on was 166 million and change. In January, so after the Board of Education had passed their budget, their financial officer identified that the trends that they are experiencing in that one particular account, which is difficult to control, and they already identified probably 1.2 million exposure in the fiscal 20, the current year budget is going to carry over to fiscal 21, and that number is 1.5 million.
And that's, you're talking about sped there, right?
The sped out of district tuition. So if, and I'm not saying the BET would have taken this action, but if the BET acknowledged and agreed that that's an exposure and funded that at the beginning, you would have added, you add that 1.5 million to their budget. So to bring the money, the budget back down to the fiscal 20 approved level of 163, you're taking out the 3 million increase, which is in the recommended budget, plus you're taking out 1.5 million of money they know that they don't have a funding source for. So that gets to a 4.5 cut, if you will.
Okay.
Is that the math that you needed?
Yep, thank you. And so, yeah, thank you. The larger, it's hard. The larger question is to come with a budget and say, as if the Board of Ed was coming to us all and saying, here's a budget. And by the way, the gnarliest, most challenging aspect of it, we're just going to set it, we just sped. We're warning you that it needs a solution. We're not delivering a solution, or we're not finding those resources among the 160 plus million that are provided. So kind of to leave it out, recognize that it's challenging, and then ask us to remedy it, it just isn't a comprehensive budgeting approach. It should have been dealt with up front. And so you're right. The larger question is, are the cuts we're talking about 3 million dramatic for the Board of Ed and their budget? You know, they get the question that we have to ask ourselves is education under-resourced in this town? At 160 million plus fringes of another 40, plus pensions carried by Hartford, Connecticut of another 27, I think I'm well into $220 million of resources for the Board of Ed. So that doesn't comport with thinking that they're under-resourced. They're not under-resourced. We know it's challenging. It's a big system. They do an excellent job, but they're not under-resourced.
I think you have to go behind that number. Sure, it's a big number. It's more than 60% of the town budgets, maybe more when you allocate all of the employee benefits, et cetera. But it's also the heart of this community. It's what drives real estate values. I think we've all heard the outcry from certain segments of the population on services they don't believe are being delivered correctly or adequately, I should say. But you have to dig behind the number, and it's hard from our position to really know, are we under-resourced or over-resourced or what the right number is. That falls probably not, the Board of Education's in a better place, but it's the administration that has the best handle on it. It's hard to know. All we know is what they ask for to continue the services that they deliver and to continue to improve the delivery to kids. And so we know what they said they needed. We're all suggesting a cut to that number. We're at a different number than you are, and hopefully we can talk about and come to some agreement on a number that, yes, you have to dig into it. So in the aggregate, it's hard to say what's the negative impact of your cut versus our cut, and that's a conversation we should keep having. But I think our goal, and I know that we share this goal, is to continue to have a high quality system to meet the needs of the kids. And those needs keep changing. It's not a static system. It's not the school system you and I went to when we were kids. You deliver it differently. The expectations are different. We have, there's a competitive environment in town. We have a lot of high quality private schools as well, and people are making choices, but we want to maintain that. And I know that you also want to maintain that. I'm not saying you don't, but I think we need to be careful about really understanding the impact of what we're talking about. And, is it rolling up your sleeves and getting to what, the no more easy savings, if you will. Even the 2% increase that they came to us with, we had the list of things that they're not doing because they have to meet their contractual requirements. And the questions out there is, can you get the union employees to share the pain with all of us on some of this? And those are longer, those are questions you can't solve right away. But I think we all need maybe a little better understanding of what's going on and what that kind of impact would have.
Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you for cutting off Mr. Raymer on that. He was next to speak, followed by Mr. Weisbrod. And you've used your 81 minutes up on that subject. That was just for fun. Mr. Raymer, I'm sorry.
No, sorry. To Karen, thank you, Karen, for your remarks. All 12 of us are very mindful of the pressure that are on people, the income insecurity, job insecurity, material changes in investment value of investments for those lucky enough to have some investments that were down by 30 or 32%. Now they're down by 15 or 16%, I believe. I'm not sure those numbers are right, but they're still down by 15 or 16%. The difficulty for each of us is to try and find a balance between trying to give some relief to the tax burden on our taxpayers as compared to the extent to which we change the level of amenity. And that balance may be different for each of the 12 of us. We strive to come together on that. And the only point I meant to be making was not to be tone deaf to the burden that are on people during this coronavirus. It's just my only point was that the actual dollar savings was quite small. And if you're not careful, you could find a significant change in amenity. And I think for a lot of these families, their reliance upon health services, their reliance upon parks and recreation will become greater. It may be that we're going to see more parents bringing their children out of the private schools and into the public system, putting more pressure on the public system. I don't know that to be the case, but it certainly is a viable possibility. During the heart of the coronavirus, we saw a lot of short-term rentals in town from families coming out of the city. I don't know if that's going to continue or if that will translate into long-term rentals or long-term purchases, so that'll have a change in the demographics. But we commit to a path over the upcoming year with these financial changes that we make, and we want them to be prudent. In the case of schools particularly, there are certain measures of an inflexibility. It's okay to say that there must be savings that can happen. I think that was Karen's remarks. But I mentioned again that their budget is 82% labor. Their dollar rates of compensation are committed in labor agreements. The school enters into contracts for the upcoming year with teachers So they need to commit to a path now during the summer that is within their permission of what they're funded for by the BET. So they can't remedy a shortfall with interim appropriations as they go along. They have to plan now for what those numbers are. They can't shut a Parkway school, which I heard one person talking about offline, on this kind of time flow. Maybe they can do that for future years. They can do redistricting, which would be the consequence of that, but they can't do that in this year. It would be very unpopular. They certainly can make changes in tax sizes so that you have, in class sizes, so that you have materially more students in a classroom and materially less teachers in front, thereby reducing the payroll. But I'm not sure that that's the level of amenity that you want. That's a decision to be made. But the bottom line here is that we're all trying to reach a balance. We're all trying to do it in good faith. We don't quite agree, but I'm sure we can find a middle ground. Thank you.
I'm sorry. Ms. Erickson, I'm sorry.
Thanks, Mike. I want to bring it back to the process a little bit. Forgive me, but this is my first BET budget workshop, and I'm trying to get back to what the goals of what this session are. We have two proposals, and I just want to echo the comments of some of my colleagues. I think an incredible amount of work went into these proposals, and I know that Pete and Roland helped behind the scenes. And to me, it's remarkable that we are in agreement on so many things. We need to tighten our belts. We need to defer some capital. We need to use some of the rainy day fund. I think there's a lot of agreement. And if you look at that last chart that Mike put up with the mill rate chart where you've never seen positive numbers before, that might be a place to start to see how if the goal is, we're just going to think about it and come back on Monday and do an awful lot of work, that's one thing. But if the goal is to try and reach some agreement on either assumptions or the way to move forward, maybe we start to pivot towards that in this meeting. The other thing I would say is there's been a lot of speculation about what a possible $3 million cut would be to the BOE budget. And with all due respect, even I've stepped away from the Board of Ed now for 3 years. I wouldn't begin to speculate on the impact of what that would do to their ability to deliver quality education to our townspeople's children and grandchildren. So we have to have a point in this process where we would hear from the superintendent of schools so we can have a better understanding of what that means. And I think Jeff said it exactly right. What we're all trying to do is respect the times that we are in, which have just dropped in our laps and are impacting everybody to an incredible degree. But we also need to balance what our residents expect and deserve. And we can't take away quality education and quality recreation, quality government services, delivering health and human services at the time when our residents need it the most. So I know we're all up to the task, but I would just ask Mike, where are we trying to go? By my count, we have 2 hours left. So what should we be trying to drive towards? Thank you.
Okay, so I was going to try to answer a few of the questions and give some perspective. And then I think my next suggestion, this is something that I've had many years of practice at, is to put the comparison chart up and ask Roland Geiger, what do we do? That's sort of always my next go-to step. It's a lot of pressure on him, and it's got a couple smiles from all of us. But let me answer your goal of today. Decision day can be very long with lots of motions and procedurally and amendments and whatever. The goal of today is to review thoughts. I hear everybody say there's a Republican proposal, a Democratic proposal, or there's two proposals. There could be 40 ideas in front of us. Any one of you could submit a motion right up until that very day to do something. The idea here is we're trying to address this a little different. So I've heard people say we're cutting a program, or we're doing it. We're not cutting anything. The idea is to reduce the growth. And I'll say this, and I give Leslie Moriarty credit. She touched on some of these. We only have so many tools. We only have so much we can do. But when I hear the word can't, that the Board of Ed can't do something, or a police department or somebody can't do that, unacceptable. Attempt They can all attempt to do something. And if any appointing authority in this town were to come back to us and say, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Let me give you an example. Right now, the Board of Ed is feverishly trying to figure out what their expenses are going to be for this year. They're doing a fantastic job. That's why they held off on the interim appropriation. So let's stick with Board of Ed, because none of us are cutting any program in Board of Ed. But what we said to the Board of Ed, all of us, including our budget committee, is say, look, tell us what kind of unspent revenue you're going to have this year so we can know if we want to do that interim or not. The Board of Ed submitted a budget to us. Let's be very, very clear. The issue that's causing their expenses to push them over the top is being labeled as out-of-district tuition. Fine. Okay, we agree on that. Very difficult situation, very complicated. But the truth of the matter is, next year, if the budget passed as the budget committee put it, or as it was submitted to us, the Board of Ed was going to come next year for an interim appropriation in that year. We're all pretty sure of that if the trends didn't change. That's why we're working as closely as we can together to actually do that work on special education, do that study. So with that said, all of us have a job to realize that next year, interim appropriations may be a more regular event. And some people in the community think, oh, that's just taboo, interim appropriations. I don't. Our forefathers put some provision in the charter to allow that to happen, and that will happen. And we will make those decisions as we go. We are influencing, it's my old thing. How do I say this? Nobody wants to ask the BET for suggestions on how to do anything until the BET turns around and says, hey, look, we don't want to do that. We don't want to give you suggestions. That's not what we're doing here. We're not telling any program to change. But I will go back and I will challenge every appointing authority in the town. And some of it has begun. We talk, Mr. Raymer, I'm going to pick on you a little bit. You say they can't do anything with their bargaining agreements. The history books doesn't lie. In the middle of 2009, every bargaining unit was brought in and said, look, I know we have an agreement. We need help. And you know who helped us in 2009, 10, and 11? Every single bargaining unit. Out of contract. They didn't open up the labor contract. We need to do that. We have 9 bargaining units. Okay, the Board of Ed just had one of their small units that had discussion. I don't think we were part of it. I don't know why I'm working on that. But everybody's involved in this. This has got to be a broad. When we talk, Jeff Raymer says the board. He brought up Parkway School. The Board of Ed can't close Parkway School. The Board of Ed didn't tell us that. The Board of Ed told us they don't want to do that, but they didn't say they couldn't. They didn't say that. Capital projects. This is a misnomer. We are making high altitude judgments. We get criticized if we, what's the old term, micromanage? I'm specifically here. I think all of us are trying to not micromanage, but we're willing to listen to these departments. Should they be cut? Yes. I will say that, and I'll speak for Mr. Weisbrod and I. We heard a comment made to us last week about why would anybody want to play against their own hand? Okay, Mr. Weisbrod and I happened to both catch that. We didn't like that comment. We're not doing that. What we're doing is we're setting a level of spending, preparing for one budget and setting us up for further. And there's no right and wrong decision. It's just judgment. So I'm going to ask Roland if he could put up whatever chart he wants. It's probably the mill rate chart. And again, I look for the ideas outside of the box.
Process-wise, how do we want to go forward? Back to Laura's question.
I think the simplest thing is let's make sure we're clearly defined, because we only have really 2 sets of a plan. I'll call it a plan rather than individual. And I think what we ought to do is figure out the impacts and the options we have so we can digest before Monday what these options are. Roland, can you share that? So I can't see Roland. Oh, he's scrolling. Suggestions, Roland? I think he's muted.
I think Roland is hiding. And I can't blame him.
There we go. You know, one of the things we haven't talked about or changed is funding the deficit at the nursing home. You know, at one point we said we'd do this over a number of years, and maybe that's something that we could phase in a little bit slower. Maybe instead of 4 million, 3 million.
They're going to produce a further negative fund balance in the year they're in. I don't know what the number is, but $3 million might not be a bad guess.
Perhaps Pete can weigh in. Would that cause? It's hard to know what would cause an issue for our auditors and the credit rating agencies. But would you have a concern with doing the Nathaniel Witherall 4-1 over a couple of years, knowing there's going to be more losses?
Going back to January of this year with Moody's and S&P, it was not an issue. And with the auditors, RSM, USLP, it was not an issue. In both cases, it wasn't an issue because we had a larger deficit about 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was 5.1 or somewhere around there. We funded it 100%, and it went away until it resurfaced last year for a number of different reasons. To Roland's point and Jeff Framer's follow-up, you're exacerbating it if you phase it in, because let's say and I don't know what the final number is going to be. Let's say Jeff Framer is 100% correct. The 4.1 erases the 4.1 from last year, that meaning June 30th, 19, but then you have another 3 million down. So if you have 4.1 and 3 million, and if you phased in 3, you're still back to 4.1. So you really, it's not 1 step forward and 2 steps back, but you're back to the same number. If you want to, and follow up to Leslie's point, the question is, how many years do you use? Do you use 5, 3? What dollar amount? I think it's safest to stick with 4.1 and not amortize, but get back to this to the erasing the previous year's fund balance. Hopefully, so what I'm saying is I'm not really a fan of phasing it in, because if you phase it in, you might have a bigger negative like next year than 4.1. Did that make sense? The way I'm not a fan. I was previously as one of the options, but I don't think phasing it in helps us if it gets worse, because I don't know what's going to happen next year.
Can I speak up? Who put that idea on the table? I think that's a worthwhile idea. Well, Roland put it on the table. In the rating agency reports for last year, I emailed everybody this key sentence, I think. Moody's didn't say anything about it, but S&P did 2 things. They said, first of all, they didn't focus on the 4.1 million negative balance on the fund basis of accounting. They focused on the $6 million, almost $7 million, I think, negative fund balance over on the other part of our CAFR on the audited balance sheet. So they specifically cited that number, the almost 7 million, and they said we are given confidence, or we, the rating agency, are not troubled because we see that the town has a plan to take action here. They recognize we've had a committee for 4 years working on the strategic solution for the withdrawal. They specifically wrote that. So I think Roland is right. They won't be troubled. They already indicated that they're not troubled by the size of a large balance, provided the town has a plan or at least a strategy to take action. So I think we could support stringing out that $4 million remedy over 2 or 3 years if we in the BET are also clear that we'll do what we can do and the town will continue its strategic reflections to take action on a strategic structural remedy for the withdrawal. So I think that's an idea worth considering. There's millions of dollars.
This is Karen. I don't have the hand raised, so I'm just going to pipe in here. I would caution us in considering that only because we don't know what next year is going to bring with withdrawal. We already know that their census is down. After the coronavirus, I think, there's a lot of talk about what's going to happen with the future of skilled nursing facilities. I just think that there are too many unknowns with this to start playing around and to start just moving 2 million here and 2 million there. I would not be in favor of doing that. I think that we should just leave it as it is.
Can I jump in?
Sure, Beth.
Yeah. No, I would concur with what Karen said. I don't think this is the time to change that 4.1. There are a lot of other things that need to be done, but I think I would hate to see us making the financial situation of Nathaniel Witherell any worse at a time when we're in the middle of this overall crisis, healthcare crisis.
Could I
No, hold on. First, Leslie first, please.
I support keeping the $4.1 million there. That is a historic audited number. I do think taking care of our historic obligations is very important. So I don't support that. I do support taking a closer look at what Witherall should be doing as it builds back its business and understanding that current year and going, even in the current business year and then going forward. But in terms of our historic, that's based on a historic audited number. And we had a lot of good advice before the budget committee made that decision. So there are many other things I would like to see happen, but not a change in that particular number.
David?
No, I'm okay.
Okay,
You have Laura first and then Beth.
okay, I'm sorry, Laura, and please.
Well, I would just say that, all ideas should be open, and I thank you for the idea, Roland. I just think we just went through the fund analysis. It's already baked into our numbers for next year. We still have a healthy fund balance, even though it's raining and we're expecting to use some of it, and our ratios are good. So I would leave it alone, knowing that there are all the uncertainties. So I agree with many of my colleagues on this point. Thank you.
Beth had her hand up. Okay, Roland.
Yes, I was
Okay.
just concerned at the what I had heard, which was some concern that we would just let Nathaniel Witherell's census keep going down and go from there, and with a thought that
I don't think that's what I said.
No,
I said
not you.
Oh,
No, not
okay.
you, Karen. I'm sorry. I didn't mean that from what you had said. It's from what I'd heard indirectly from others. And I would be very concerned at the thought that, yes, their census has gone down right now as a result of the virus. But I have every reason to believe that as soon as things are under control, that census will begin to come back up. And with a new executive director, I would hope that we would support the institution until such time as the town decides it wants to take a different tact with regard to that facility. But I would ask that we maintain our support and be very careful about the signals that we're sending right now when they're doing a very important job in this community. Thanks.
Roland,
Agree with everybody, leave it alone.
Roland, next thoughts.
I mean, that's it. You know, what do you want to cut from the budget? What do you want for tax? That's it.
Can I ask a question, Roland? It's small dollars, but that Verizon cell tower lease that's currently directed to go into the Gulf Fund, are we able to move that revenue stream to the general fund?
I don't know about the revenue stream. I guess we could, but we have a resolution in the budget book that allows us to take fund balance from the golf course and the nursing home.
Okay, so that's an idea that, you know, we should consider doing. I guess we need to get the exact numbers and timing of that cash flow, but it's certainly a big change to the golf fund's resources.
Roland, can I ask a question? Just I'm stuck on something, and Leslie Tarkin had her hand up first. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Leslie. Oh, maybe that was from before. Roland, can you do me a favor? I can't. I'm having a challenge focusing on it. Can you do me a favor? Can you go to the column L, go down to the capital requests, and make that 5235. Just, well, it's 52. Well, I want to be able to return to that though. It's 52,962. Can you just make it 35 and let it calculate out, or make it the same, whatever you want to do. I just need to see it. What it does to the bottom line, I'm sorry, is what I'm saying.
It depends on your assumption to the capital tax levy. So your assumption at 50, where we had it, which was 54,847.
I get it. I'm just
telling Roland, because the spreadsheet he's looking at doesn't calculate. He's got to put in the number.
What you could do is, right, if you make the top line 35 million, you change the borrowings to 27,143. You got, okay, you left it. Okay, fine.
Because I think there's going to be a lot of, people saying, well, why'd you cut capital, or why'd you cut so much, or why didn't you cut more, whatever that conversation is. I think we're doing it for current budget and future budget impact. I think we understand that, but I just want to see this calculation. And I
mean, the number that drops down to the mill rate calculation to what residents are paying is that line 16, the total capital tax levy.
Right.
Which we're setting. And so there's, a positive and negative. Reducing capital in one sense, it's less expenditure this year, but going forward, it doesn't reduce the pressure on borrowings as we come back to a capital plan, whatever that plan may be.
There is definitely a trade-off in one way or another.
Yep.
Okay, Roland, what did that do to the calculation down below?
It didn't do anything because we didn't change the actual capital tax levy.
Okay, bring the capital tax levy down in that column. I'm just using that column. Bring it down to 53.
Tax levy goes to 0.24. I mean, the mill rate goes to 0.24%. If you keep, yeah.
Okay. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just saying that puts us 4.5% apart. It's just, you just had to see it. Okay, yeah, a little bit more than 0.5%. Okay, and then the question is, you know, I'm Leslie Moriarty. I'm not trying to just mess with your model. I just know ours, and I don't know yours as well. And I'm just trying to think how much more of that can be taken out of operational expenses versus your set of ideas and plan versus our set of ideas and plans. That's all. I'm just trying to let everybody kind of have a visual digest, because they're going to have a couple, 3 days to do that. So
I have to figure out how to get to my Lotus spreadsheet, my Excel spreadsheet, while I have this Zoom screen on. I have to minimize it somehow. How do I
okay,
do that?
So Mike, I've unmuted. Can I go back, or you want to stay on this point?
yeah, can you just leave that there rolling so everybody can kind of digest a little bit? Leslie, you had two people have their hands up. Leslie had her hand up. Somebody else.
Yeah, I just
Me.
wanted to further comment on Leslie's comment in terms of the revenue stream from Verizon. I too listened to the RTM meeting, and I do understand the historic agreement with the golf course fund, but I think we should look at what those rental numbers were from Verizon when that was established, and then I guess what it's now a dramatic increase, probably because of the volume going through that tower. But also I'd like to add to that the AT&T lease, because I think there's income coming from there. So I think that is at least, you know, some opportunity for some transfer of revenue, not necessarily the whole thing. I don't agree with that, you know, going that far. But I do think we need to look at everything and what was the intent of the original agreement. So I would support that. I also want to just speak just a little bit about capital. And as we're looking at these capital numbers, I want to remind everything that you know, yes, there are some things going on, some capital projects, perhaps some major ones, but there are a lot that aren't happening. And when we look at the capital numbers from about 3 weeks ago, just, you know, in less than a month, and certainly a couple of weeks after this whole shutdown happened, at that point in time, the town had in encumbrances and available budget $101 million of capital projects that had been appropriated but hadn't been executed. And of that number, $65 million are town projects, and of that number, $36 million are Board of Education projects. So we know that this process is slowing, not due to anyone's fault, but because all of us are more homebound and things just don't happen so rapidly. So I think when we look at our capital budget, no matter whose budget we're looking at, whether it's the first selectmen's or the Republicans or the Democrats, we have to keep in mind that just because of these slowdowns, and it will be continuing to slow down, that we will automatically have to push some of this out. And everyone is feeling that, no matter whether they're a resident or a part of the town organization. We're all deferring things in this period of time. So I do think that has to be brought back in focus. Again, $101 million of capital projects that have been approved that still need to be executed. And I think that's critical in terms of looking ahead to this 1 year. And I don't think that these reductions are necessarily, they should be considered differently, because we have to subtract at least 3 or 4 months at minimum out of what can be accomplished next year, because we still have a lot left from this year that will need to be accomplished. And you know, again, I just wanted to remind people of that one. Thank you.
Hey, Mike.
Thank you. Mr. Raymer was next.
Maybe this is a heresy, because we budget conservatively, and it has served us very, very well. But maybe there's one point here where we're being a little too conservative. Last year on state aid, including federal aid that came to us through the state, we received, when I say last year, I'm talking about fiscal year 19, we received $5.5 million. We budgeted in the current year just $224,000, and we've already received 2.4, a little bit less, million. And for the model, I think everybody's model going forward, we assume 0. I'm wondering if that's just a little too cautious. Again, last year we received 5.5, and in the current year we've already received not quite 2.4. Maybe 0 is just a little too conservative.
So Beth Crummick was next. Thank you, Mr. Irwin.
Yeah, my hope as we look at this whole process of establishing the budget for next year is that we differentiate between those capital projects where they're a discrete purchase or a item that could be put off for a year that would not change the services provided by that department, and that we retain those projects where we're trying to move forward to progress to the future. And I use as an example Julian Curtis and Old Greenwich, because I think those are efforts by the Board of Education to move us into the future with their buildings at a time where there has to be some movement forward. So I would ask that we try to differentiate between those types of capital projects and help move forward on the ones where we're addressing ADA, or we're addressing stormwater problems, or we're addressing security in our buildings. I think we need to step back and look at some of the themes that are important, even given the serious financial concerns that we have. Thank you.
I'm going to call on Ms. Cruiser next, and I would say to Ms. Krumik's comments, very, very well-founded. And I think so far, most of everything's been trying to figure a dollar amount to make it work. And I do think there'll be some more thoughts on maybe some changes in individual thoughts, but I agree. Essentially, we're trying to still stay high altitude. Ms. Cruiser.
I was hoping just to bring it to slightly a different conversation on the operating side. One of the disconnects that I'm a little bit uncomfortable with is if we look at the departmental cuts that we've assumed, and everyone's assumed between the Office of First Selectman, Republican, and the Democratic caucus, there seems to be a bringing back of Parks and Rec to basically last year's. They were treated like everyone else, even though on our revenue assumptions, a reduction of revenue assumptions, there's about $1 million that's not coming in from Parks and Rec. And I wonder if there's a way to get a better number as to the operational side, the costs associated with that $1 million. If we're going to assume it on one side, we should assume it on the other. And I'm not saying remove it, because we all hope that all of the camps and the summer goes as planned, but maybe there's a way to condition the operating side and take that balance from unrestricted fund balance, so that if that revenue does come in, it basically pays off for the component of that we're earmarking it from the fund balance as a condition to whether or not these programs happen. But I don't know what that means. I'm assuming the costs are not equal to the revenues, but whatever that amount is, I think that would buy us a couple of $100,000 in additional operating.
Bill has a comment.
This is good progress. I thought that the idea of this meeting would be words and talking, and the idea of Monday's meeting is voting. And so in that light, which I think, thank you, Laura, for asking a question, what can we accomplish today? I think that's a great question. I have 5 topics that I'd like to propose to Mike and everybody else. Tell us if you think there are ones that we could deal with in this call. One is, let me just list them. One is the $900,000 adjustment of health costs. Are we all going to agree on that? Is that something we should discuss? Second item, should we walk through the capital list, have all our discussions, again, have our words today so that Monday we have our votes and you don't have to listen to me. Thirdly, revenues. We're pretty close. The 2 propositions on revenues. Can we lay that one to bed? And then 2 other little ones. I would propose to spare everybody me talking about the Witherell accounting adjustments on Monday and do it today. It'll take 3 minutes. And the fifth one is I have a $20,000 change to the rink appropriation, which was just I kind of proposed the wrong number 4 days ago. It's a tiny tweak, doesn't change the substance. So are those 5 topics that we should approach today?
My feeling is that they're naturally going to come up. I do think the revenues and the healthcare are close. I think the capital list, I don't think you can really, we've got 3 lists actually to look at, by the way. And I will say, I only got, I did not have a list from Democratic caucus until late. I didn't end until dinner time. So I haven't even been able to do that. We've dumped them into a spreadsheet to compare. And I was trying to do that this morning. So I think when we talk capital, we need to figure a number so we can figure what the impact is to the capital tax levy and where everybody's willing to be. We started this conversation. I think we've learned a lot, but I think this budget is going to come down to judgment call on the capital tax levy, which means capital and the capital tax levy. I think in the operating.
What?
That's where I think you're going to see the motions refined to do that. Laura Erickson had her hand raised.
Well, I don't know if we're winding down our conversation or where we are, but I didn't want to leave without looking at the first look budget in column P.
Thank
you.
You.
I think that's pretty informative as we look to set the budget for fiscal 20 to look at fiscal 21 to look at 22. And I think if you scroll down to the bottom, that's a mill rate that nobody has any appetite for. So my general comment is as we look at operating cuts, I would say that assuming this is going to go on for several months, years, I don't know what the outcome will be, but there's a difference between acting in the short term and then planning for the long term. And I think we have a little flexibility with our general fund balance, which we've taxed our residents for years in anticipation of a rainy day. And as everyone has admitted, it's raining. So we need to look at what we need to do for the short term and then what we might need to do for the longer term. So I just would urge everybody, I don't think those assumptions for pensions and healthcare are too off the mark. But I would just remind people that if we're deferring in column J, the capital of about 37 million, which I think is 33 million of deferred projects and $4 million of reductions in projects, that 50 million, if we're really bringing it back a year, that 50 million is thereby absorbed by that 37 million we're deferring. So that leaves only 13 million of new projects, which is barely a maintenance level. So that might be a problem. And I think we need to think about that as we look at fiscal 21.
Okay, so I think, first of all, I think Roland's correcting the sheet back to where it was, which is good. I would ask Roland, two thoughts. I would ask Roland to take, because Roland, I don't think either caucus made the first look column. I think that was something we asked Roland to do. So I would just have Roland run us through his thoughts with those assumptions. And as far as cut their capital, let me ask everybody to think a little bit different. If the virus didn't happen, we were starting to think about years of capital that might have averaged 75, 70, I don't know the number. Over 10 years, that's 700 million, okay? Over 10 years, even with, I'll use our number reduction, $36 million, over 10 years, we made out of 700 million projections, we made a slight tweak of 36 million. Start thinking multiple budgets. You have to think commitments because capital is not paid for in 1 year other than like police cars and stuff. Capital is paid in a series of years. So in the big...
It ripples through, Mike.
I understand. I don't interrupt you. I don't interrupt. Okay. So I just would think of it that way. So I would ask Roland to take us down column Papa P.
E is based upon J,
Okay.
and the operating is increased 2% for everything except when we got to the pensions and the healthcare. The pension one, I took it up to 30 million. And OPEB went up to 4 million, and healthcare went up 10%. And that's got us to this number here.
So, quick question. I see a couple of hands up. Mr. Weisbrod was up first, Ms. Tarkin. So the question would be, is 2 million on the operating, is that doable? Is that, I'm thinking labor contracts, I'm thinking everything. Is that normal? What did we do here? What did we do rolling back in from 19 to 20?
Well,
20 to 21, we were anticipating 13 million going up. And you're okay, you're close, you're close. Okay, Mr. Weisbrod had his hands up, followed by Ms. Tarkington.
So I've got one comment and one question. One of the things, I mean, Karen Faziolitis made a very interesting point, which I agree with, and that is that we could be faced with a longer term financial crisis, the impact of which would have two consequences. One is that more of the kids that are currently enrolled in private schools may by financial necessity have to go to the public schools, impacting the census, the population of our students in the public schools. And the other comment is that there's reports from real estate brokers that there are a lot of people cooped up in New York City studio, 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom apartments that are looking to flee and come into the suburbs. And that'll also, if that comes to fruition, increase the population of our school. We don't know, but that's a potential, I don't want to say a headwind, but financially it would be a bit of a headwind. The other thing I wanted to say is on the capital tax levy. To me, it's a little like the pension question that the state started getting into. It's a slippery slope. That is to say, if we cut the capital tax levy too much, it's easy to do, but what happens then is that your pension plan, if you will, is underfunded, and effectively your pool for capital projects is underfunded. Now, I recall we had a debate last year or the year before about the mega projects that the schools are considering to make them ADA compliant and to replace Central Middle School. And we know the list, and it's several $100 million. And the argument at the time, which didn't succeed, was that, going to a longer term, 20-year maturity on the debt could accommodate that inflow of projects. That did not work. It was not approved and didn't go forward. The argument was made that we didn't really need that. In other words, that given the 5-year modified pay-as-you-go and the level of historical capital projects that this town has had, we could easily accommodate those needs in our schools and so forth and elsewhere by the this sheer scale, if you will, of our capital projects, which historically has gone on for a number of years. So all of which is to say that the capital tax levy is one that worries me. I'm less worried about whether it's 25 million or 36 million for 1 year. That has an immediate consequence. But if you start playing with the capital tax levy, I just think we have to be very, very careful, because it's more of an accounting thing that will then plant the seed for a permanent structural change in the flow of capital into our community. And that has to be made clear to everyone in the community. I don't know if people disagree with that, but that's how I see it.
Ms. Tarkington was next.
Yes, I really have two comments here. One addresses operating and then one on capital. In terms of the operating, or looking at column P, I would hope over the next, remaining part of this fiscal year, obviously working into next year, as Mike said earlier, that our unions and first selectman, BOE step up to the plate and see what we can do in terms of the kind of things that were offered and worked cooperatively back in 2009, 2010, that period. That really helped to lower the base costs of the existing year, which in this case will be the actual expenditures during fiscal year 21 that we're talking about. That goes into the base, and then that helps us in all future years. And I do think that that's important. In some cases, some of the programs instituted increased costs in the short term. If you don't hire part-time people, they still collect unemployment. We had early retirement programs that were perhaps a little bit costly in the beginning. I think Witherall might have even had 37 or 38 people that took the program, lowering their cost base. But I think even if they're more expensive in the short term, it helps your long-term, costs and lowers the base immediately. So I think there's a lot that needs to be done with everyone working together, no matter what budget we approve for next year. Maybe there will still be a way that we can continue to work on that. In terms of the capital side, one thing, while I certainly support maintaining a very steady, contribution to the capital the way we have been doing, I think 1 year respite doesn't hurt us. And the other thing that, I hope to be, support, as budget committee chairman, is a better attention to collecting the revenues that are due to us on capital from the state or federal. I think much more focus on our bridge programs and getting that money ASAP helps us with our capital. I also think that adding to that program, not only bridges, but these other CMAQ programs, the ones for Arch Street and Glenville, to get that money in. And I think, Roland, is this correct, that we really don't budget for any of those things? So the faster we can get that, and then I'm also going to add that at our last budget committee meeting, Sean O'Keefe updated us on our collections on school reimbursements, and the BOE hopes to submit, requests for reimbursement for both MESA and for Hamilton Avenue. There's usually an audit period that takes, I think, 12 months, but that any kind of receipt of those funds would also come in on capital in our fiscal 21 budget. So I just wanted to add these additional thought pieces as we look forward to, putting the details to this upcoming budget over the next few days. Thank you.
Ms. Cruiser.
Yes, just staying on the capital side, just a couple of things that I'm thinking through. So my understanding is we've received, I think all members of the BET have received the Office of the First Selectman's recommendations on the capital side. My understanding is that Mr. Branyan went to the departments. I think with the exception of the Board of Ed, still needed to sort of scrub through that. But with the exception of the Board of Ed, those were all projects that while they were disappointed, they could see those potential cuts. And I'm assuming that part of that was their thoughts that those were, has been discussed, probably couldn't get executed, or there may be a slowdown in that. So I would think that that's sort of a good place to start. But for those that can continue, I just thinking through what we're looking at within the next year. We all know that costs are going to come down. We also, in terms of labor costs, material costs, et cetera. So for the things that could move forward, I don't think we should be penalizing those particular projects, especially because if you think about where borrowing, maybe now I know municipal markets are a little volatile right now, but our borrowing should not be very dissimilar to what it was last year, which, as we know, was 85 basis points for 5 years. So this is also, we should strike a balance between what we can't do and what we can do cheaper And I'm not sure it's half of that 72. So I think we need to go through it with a finer tooth comb.
Okay, let me just.
Can I just add, I think our caucus would love to see what, your thoughts are with respect to capital. I don't think we've seen that list yet. And, obviously there might be some agreements, and then we can talk about the disagreements.
I agree with that. We tried to, I think we tried to give a full package of everything, and including sort of a narrative and then the separate motions. We only have 4 motions. I think we're coming to a time where the caucuses are going to need to revisit. I just want to switch gears for some other, in the package, there's some suggested subject to releases or conditions, some of them are roll forward, obviously, and some of them we may have to work on Monday that might be attached to a capital project. So I just want to make sure I get a flavor from everybody. You've got those, you're reviewing those. Our budget resolutions, I'm not sure, I didn't really review that. I was sort of, the law committee had done that back when and had some recommended changes. That will be before us on Monday. I want to reiterate a couple steps for Monday if possible. Our big sheet, we call it the voting document, is posted online as a reference document, a working document, with no mention of any of the suggested thoughts that we have of change, but it is there for the public to follow us. That was posted yesterday. I call it the voting document. It's Roland's document. It's the large piece of paper, but I just want everybody to understand that is, I don't know if you can't see it, but that is online for people who are participating to be able to watch us. I don't think that's it, Roland.
Yes, it is.
Oh yeah, that's it. I'm sorry. Thank you. No, the one that's online is it has no recommended changes. It's just what came from the budget and the budget committee. Oh, maybe that is it. I'm sorry. Maybe that is it. Okay. Thank you, Roland. Roland, can I get the screen back so I can see? Because I think people are going to want to comment. Just for a second. Stop share there. So I think the idea is in our I can't even use the word normal this year. I've been through a fair amount of budget. I'm looking at Mr. Raymer, Ms. Target. This is just not normal. I don't. So again, I plan on being as lax as I can. If a motion passes and there's something you didn't like, I'm going to allow, no matter where you stood on that, to revisit that. I want to be that way. And I think we're going to do general government, and then we're going to do, in the categories. So again, I think it's time for the caucuses to get together. I would say Mr. Weisbrod probably hit it. There's some differences here. There's some judgment calls, and I think we need to get to where we are. I think all of us realize that we're going to be doing budget from July 1. We're going to be doing changes. There's probably going to be transfer. There's going to be a lot of things that happen. We're going to be revisiting capital. I think we all have our fingers crossed and monitoring any grants that come from the state out of the federal distribution of money. Mr. Raymer has got a serious concern about what they're doing, and I share that as well with him. And we have to see what comes our way there. That could be a major changer for all of us as far as what we do. So that's sort of the plan going forward. I'm sure both caucuses have caucuses scheduled, so and we can, share thoughts.
Can I ask one question on process?
Sure.
I know that we're going to consider more global motions. I have a little concern of how we're going to work through capital. Granted, we haven't come up with our list, but there's your proposed list. The first selectman's list is different than yours. My guess is our list and our list, even if the 6 of us can all agree, which may not happen on capital. So there may be a variety of lists. So by dealing with one motion on deleting all of these capital items, or changing the dollar amount, some will go to 0, some will go to some number. You split those into 2 motions. I see a little difficulty with doing that, because if your list includes a certain number, and I don't agree with 3 projects. Am I supposed to vote against the whole list? Even though I know I can bring back a specific item on there, it just puts us into a little difficult issue.
So that is the perfect question. So let's answer that. Okay, I make a motion to cut. I'll show you how I envision this working, and I've got some real Robert's Rules professionals here. I make a motion to cut these 10 projects. Second, discussion, and we know what the discussion's about. Okay, I call for a vote on that. The vote passes. So those 10 projects are now reduced to 0. I entertain a motion. I would like to reinstate project number this, Second, discussion, and there'll be a vote on that. The only difference is we could do them one by one at the start, or the purpose of sort of the big motion, and when we have a list from you and we have the list from Ben and we have our list, I think, and I don't have much time on Monday morning, but I would think if there is a commonality list to start, I would be willing to separate motions to take and make one motion of the common motions between all of us and Ben.
That's a good plan, to do one of all the common motions and then take the rest up individually. Because as a voter, I don't know if I'm gonna, if you say cut these 10, I don't agree with one of them, then do I vote for all or not?
I understand, and I just want to deviate before I volunteer Roland, that would be doable, right? If we were to give you a list of what we're going to call common capital deferral projects.
Sure, I can combine the common ones and create a motion with that.
Right. Okay.
Of course, that supposes that you're going to get a unified view from us, and we'll work towards that. We'll see.
Well, I say to everybody, I think, again, I can't thank everybody enough, but it is 12 of us here. This is, some people like to take the position there's 6 people and we'll see what they say. Well, I don't want to see what 6 people say. I want to see what 12 people say. I really would love to see your ideas on capital. I thought Ben's, in a quick skim at Ben's, I scratched my head a couple times and I thought about it. So we're all ears.
I'd also like, to end, it would be great if at the end of the process, we could all agree on this final resolved budget. But that's going to mean all of us need to compromise and to figure out where we can meet in the middle somewhere.
I think if I saw that last comparison chart, I think everybody's put their heart on their sleeve there and told you what they feel and the emotional feeling. And I think people are trying to convince people out of that feeling by saying, oh, we're cutting this. I don't think so. I think we're just going to have to rely on it. All of us are going to work very hard in the next year. And by the way, let's just talk about operating for a minute. I'll throw this out. If the operating budget reduction, whatever that number is, 5, 8, 6, call it 6, whatever the number is, we always have fund balance. If there's a department in that kind of trouble or that kind of situation where we actually caused, something that we need to, it's an interim process, and I understand that. And we'll fight for, if we support an interim appropriation, then we have to support it all the way right through the RTM. But I think we have that as a backup plan. But I think going forward, I think
it's a backup plan, but it sends a different message to managers saying, we expect you to live at this level going into the year. And I think we just have to be cognizant of that.
And that's why we have managers.
Can I ask the same process question regarding operating then? How are you going to approach operating? Are you going to call the departments one by one and not do a global motion?
We typically run through the departments. The RTM has a thing where they don't go back. You have a sample motion in our submittal. We took the time to do what the criteria said. You have a sample motion.
Yeah, we do.
We can run through the departments and then offer that motion at the end. We can run through the departments, offer that motion at the beginning. Everybody knows I'm all about culture and productivity and doing what works best for the 12 of us. I'm sure Mr. Raymer, Ms. Vesalotis, and I will be having a chat on just some of that offline. But I want to say I'm flexible, but in normal fashion, for those of us, we're going to open up general government right on through all the various departments. And an omni motion could come at the end. It could come at the beginning. I'm all ears, Mr. Raymer, so I'll talk to you offline about that.
Okay. I mean, maybe you answered my question by saying let's talk about it offline, but to not do that for just a second, to Leslie's point that if you have this omnibus motion that you have on page 4, that lists, I didn't count them, but let's say 20 departments in which you made dollar changes, and then you have others on the revenue side. If I have 7 of them, which I don't quite agree with your dollar figures, I'm a few dollars apart, it's a very cumbersome motion if it's an omnibus motion. Whereas if you're taking them up one by one, not as a global motion, calling it one department at a time like we've done in past years, I think mechanically that's a little easier.
I would disagree with that statement. I'll take your example though, and I'll answer it for you. If there's whatever the number you said in that sample motion that we submitted,
yes.
If there's 20 departments, and I'm going to use your number, and there's 7 departments, you think that there's, let's try it another way. You think there's 5 departments, the number is off just a little bit. I would entertain one motion from you to correct the following departments from that to this. I would entertain that motion from you and discuss it.
Can we consider doing operating like capital is to put together a motion that identifies the areas in which we have agreement, put those together, and then take the other departments one by one, maybe?
Again, on the operating, I think by the way, just so you know, I think the difference in the operating is I have the special funds, but that is an option too. I don't think Monday morning is going to start off exactly vote, 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 vote. I think Monday is going to start a little bit of organization, but it's our meeting. It's not, we can do this, but I'm looking for, I want to respect, if there is a motion that has a multitude of modifications and you don't, and you have to vote against that resolution. But I also want to say, if you say I'm voting against this for these 3 items, I want you to be able to have the opportunity to try to restore those. And by the way, I think everybody knows where they agree. I think I think these are conversations that we have to have and, make decisions, and everybody's listening to everybody. That's the one positive thing out of this, and it's not easy. Okay, Ms. Tarkington, oh, no, I guess not.
I was just going to make a comment that on the conditions, there may, if any other projects are brought back that are sort of multi-phase, we may need to add conditions. So I will look at, everyone's list to make sure that we have the conditions in advance in case any additional projects are approved other than what was on the list posted yesterday. Because I think that would help us rather than writing conditions on the fly at Monday's evening meeting. So I just wanted to make that suggestion because again, the conditions relate to the projects approved, and there may be conditions there where the project is not approved. So
okay.
We'll work on that over the next couple of days too. Thank you.
And Leslie Moriarty, just as a follow-up, I mean, I know you said that you may not have agreement on all the capital projects, but where you do agree, you can forward that list so we can work on it. And then where there is disagreement, you can say we discussed this, but we don't have agreement on it. Just so that we have an idea of where you're coming from.
Sure, we can do that.
And I would just add, if we can just share with each other schedules in Excel, so to make it easier, please.
I agree. We're all converting.
Before I entertain a motion to close our workshop, I just want you to know I'm under very strict orders from Mr. Weisbrod on how our meeting is on Monday. I don't know if he's listening. I'm under very strict orders from Mr. Weisbrod on how our meeting is conducted on Monday.
So no, I'm listening with very keen interest, Mike. What do you have in mind? What are my orders? I love it when I give orders. I love it.
Mr. Weisbrod in conversations say, we have a lot of work to do, and it has to be organized and it has to be well run, and so I'm following that directive the best.
I have to say, I the risk of being a little bit Pollyannish, I do think this workshop has been conducted very well. And I commend you, Mike, I do. I think we've aired a lot of different views. We've gotten a lot of facts laid out. We've gotten a lot of clarity on things that are really important. Everybody's had a chance to weigh in. It's been a very good use of time, and I think you deserve credit for that. So I really do. I do want to say that on behalf of only myself.
I will not take credit. I will not take credit for this. We had a transition team. Look at the IT that got us here. Everybody's done their fair share of work. It's not me. This is us. This is all of us, Peter, Roland, IT, everybody's input. No, it's not me. It took a lot to do this. So I will entertain, I forget who sits where, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Andy Deuce has got that honor. He always has.
Not
No,
anymore. It's mine and Laura's now.
Laura.
Well, Miriam and I trade off.
Okay.
Up to Mike.
Thank you. Thank you both. We have a motion seconded to adjourn.
Second. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.